The rope cut into her wrists before she even understood what was happening. Marshal Garrett grabbed Evelyn Hart by the back of her collar, the same collar she had carefully pressed that morning, believing she was dressing for her wedding, and dragged her through the center of Silverbrook's main street like something he had scraped off the bottom of his boot. The crowd parted. Some stepped back, most leaned in. He lashed her to the post in front of the sheriff's office with the kind of practiced efficiency that told everyone watching he had done this before and felt nothing doing it. "This woman," Garrett announced, turning to face the gathered townspeople with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man who had never once been questioned, "murdered Daniel Hart in cold blood. Found her standing over the body." Hands red, Evelyn tried to speak. He backhanded her across the mouth. The crowd didn't flinch. A few of them nodded. "She came here looking for a husband," Garrett continued, straightening his coat. "Well, if any man wants to take responsibility for her, step forward now. Otherwise she answers for what she did." Nobody moved. Nobody was going to. If you've ever felt completely alone in a room full of people surrounded and invisible at the same time, then you already understand exactly what Evelyn Hart felt in that moment. And if you want to know whether she survived it, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The stagecoach that carried Evelyn Hart into Silverbrook arrived 20 minutes late and smelled like wet leather and tobacco, and the particular kind of desperation that settles into people who have been traveling too long with nowhere certain to go. She was 26 years old. She had $41, a worn carpet bag containing everything she owned, and a folded letter in her coat pocket that she had read so many times the creases had gone soft. "Dear Miss Evelyn, my name is Daniel Hart. I am a landowner and farmer in Silverbrook, Colorado Territory. I am 34 years of age, in good health, and in possession of 200 acres of productive land. I am honest and I work hard, and I have been told I am decent company, though I make no grand promises about that. I am looking for a woman of reasonable temperament and good sense. If you are willing to come west, I will provide passage, honest employment, and the prospect of a real home. Nothing more is guaranteed, but nothing less either. Yours respectfully, Daniel Hart." It was not a romantic letter. She had noticed that from the first reading, but there was something in its plainness that she trusted more than she would have trusted flowery promises. Daniel Hart had not tried to sell her anything. He had simply told the truth as he understood it, and in Evelyn's experience, that was rarer than it should have been. She had answered the advertisement 6 months ago, in a rooming house in St. Louis where she had lived for 3 years working as a seamstress, taking in mending and alterations for women who could afford to have such things done by someone else. She was not miserable. She was not starving. But she was $33 away from miserable at any given moment, and the loneliness of her life had a particular quality to it. Not the dramatic, consuming loneliness of grief, but the slow, grinding loneliness of a life that simply had no one in it. Her mother had died when Evelyn was 19. Her father had left before that. She had a brother, Samuel, somewhere in Kansas, but they had not written in over a year, and when they did write, the letters were careful and brief, the way letters become between people who love each other but have forgotten how to say so. When she answered Daniel's advertisement, she told herself it was practical. She was 26. She was not getting younger. The work was steady but would not remain so. Her eyes had already begun to strain on long evenings of close stitching, and she had watched older seamstresses in the same house slowly lose the precision their work required, and then lose the work entirely. West was the word on everyone's lips. Land, they said. A new start. Room to breathe. What she did not tell herself, because she had learned to be suspicious of her own wanting, was that she was desperately tired of eating dinner alone. The stagecoach driver called out Silverbrook, and she gathered her bag and stepped down into the street, squinting in the afternoon light. The town was smaller than she had imagined. One main street, timber-fronted buildings, a church at the far end, and a saloon 3 doors from where she stood. A water trough. A blacksmith's hammer ringing somewhere out of sight. It smelled like horses and sawdust and something cooking, probably beans. A boy of about 12 was leaning against the post office wall. He looked at her with open curiosity. "You the mail-order bride?" he asked. "I'm here to meet Daniel Hart," she said. The boy's expression shifted in a way she couldn't fully read, some mixture of awkwardness and something else, something guarded. "Mr. Hart's house is on Birch Road," he said, "that way, past the feed store. You can't miss it." She thanked him and walked. She found the house without difficulty. It was a modest structure, well kept, she noticed. The porch boards not rotting, the window frames recently painted. She appreciated that. It suggested someone who attended to things before they became problems. She stood at the gate for a moment, straightening her collar, smoothing the front of her coat. She had worn her better dress for the occasion, dark blue wool, not fashionable but clean and well-fitted. She had taken particular care with her hair that morning at the way station, knowing this was the kind of first impression that could not be made twice. She knocked, no answer. She knocked again a little louder. The door swung open under her knuckles unlatched, not locked, just resting against the frame, and the smell reached her before anything else did. She would think later, in the long months of what followed, that the worst part was that she had not known what she was walking into. If she had known, she might have run. But she didn't know, and so she pushed the door open further and stepped inside, and she saw Daniel Hart on the floor of his own kitchen. And she understood immediately, in the specific, absolute way the body understands things before the mind catches up, that he was dead. She did not scream. She stood in the doorway, and her bag dropped from her hand, and she put one hand against the doorframe because her legs had gone strange beneath her. She was still standing there, had been standing there for no more than 30 seconds, maybe less, when the back door opened and Marshal Wade Garrett walked in with 2 deputies flanking him. He looked at Daniel on the floor. He looked at Evelyn in the doorway. He looked at her hands. There was blood on her right hand. She had touched the doorframe. "Well," Garrett said, in a voice that was almost conversational, "what do we have here?" She spent 4 months in a cell. This is the part of Evelyn's story that is difficult to explain to people who have not experienced it. Not the injustice, which is straightforward enough, but the specific texture of that kind of imprisonment. The cell was 8 feet by 6 feet. There was a cot with a thin mattress that had been used by enough people before her that its origins were unknowable. There was a bucket. There was a window the size of a hardcover book, set high in the wall, which gave her a rectangle of sky and nothing else. They fed her once a day. Sometimes twice when the deputy on duty, a young man named Cord, who appeared to be embarrassed about the whole situation, but not embarrassed enough to do anything about it, remembered, or felt guilty enough to bring something extra. The food was indifferent. She ate it. What she could not do was make anyone listen. She told Garrett what she had told him. From the first moment she had arrived in Silverbrook on the afternoon stage, she had walked to Daniel Hart's house, as instructed in his letter. She had found the door unlocked and had pushed it open. She had found him already dead. She had not touched him. The blood on her hand was from the doorframe. She had never met Daniel Hart. She had corresponded with him for 6 months. She had no reason, no earthly reason to harm a man she had traveled 800 miles to marry. Garrett listened to this with the patient, faintly amused expression of a man who has already decided what happened and is simply waiting for the conversation to end. "Lots of women do terrible things," he said, and then come up with reasonable-sounding stories. "I came 800 miles, she said. "Why would I travel 800 miles to kill a man I had never met?" "Maybe you had your reasons," he said. "We'll figure them out." They never did figure them out, because they were not interested in figuring them out. She understood that within the first week. The investigation, if it could be called that, lasted 4 days, and consisted primarily of Garrett telling various townspeople that the evidence was clear and the woman had been found standing over the body. Nobody asked to examine the scene. Nobody took a formal statement from Evelyn. Nobody contacted anyone she might have known in St. Louis to verify who she was or what her character might be. She was a stranger. She had no ties to the town. She had no family who would come looking for her. She was, as far as Silverbrook was concerned, exactly the kind of woman a murder could be pinned to without anyone much caring about the inconvenience to her. She wrote 2 letters to Samuel from the cell. She did not know if they were sent. She had given them to the young deputy Cord, who took them with what seemed like genuine intention. She heard nothing back. In the 4th month, she began to wonder if she was going to die in this town. Not at the end of a rope. They had never formally charged her, which she eventually understood was its own kind of strategy. A way of keeping her available as a useful accusation without having to go through the trouble of a trial, but simply from the accumulated weight of it. The cold, the indifferent food, the 8 by 6 feet, the sense that she had ceased to exist as a person in the minds of everyone around her, and become, instead, a story people told each other to confirm what they already believed. She lost weight she could not afford to lose. She got a cough that settled into her chest and didn't fully leave. She stopped talking as much, even to Cord, because the effort of speaking began to seem disproportionate to whatever it produced. This was her condition on the morning Garrett decided to use her as a public spectacle. She did not know why he chose that particular morning. Later she would wonder if he had received some pressure from someone, if there was something happening she didn't have visibility into, if the spectacle on the post was meant to accomplish something specific rather than simply being the exercise of the particular variety of cruelty that she had come to understand was Garrett's nature. But on the morning itself, the The deputies came to her cell before she had fully woken, pulled her to her feet, and marched her out into the street. The air hit her like a physical thing. She had not been outside in 11 days. The light was sharp and the cold had teeth, and the people of Silverbrook were already gathered. Not by accident, she realized. This had been announced. Garrett worked the rope around her wrists with efficient contempt. He had not looked directly at her once since she'd been brought out. He talked to the crowd instead the whole time, addressing them as though she were a display in a shop window. 4 months ago, he said, this woman came to Silverbrook under the pretense of an honorable arrangement with a good man. Daniel Hart was a man this town knew and trusted. He is gone now because of her. Evelyn tried to say something. One of the deputies put a hand on her shoulder hard, a warning. Now, Garrett continued, I'm a practical man. I don't believe in wasting town resources on people who don't belong here. If any man in this crowd wants to take responsibility for this woman, take her off our hands, keep her out of trouble, he can step forward. Otherwise, she'll face judgment in whatever way the town sees fit. The phrase whatever way the town sees fit hung in the air. Everyone understood what it meant, or what it might mean. That was the point. Nobody stepped forward. The crowd watched her. Some of them were people she had seen in those first hours before her arrest. The woman at the general store who had looked at her bag with curiosity. The man at the feed store who had nodded a greeting. Now they watched her tied to a post, and their faces were not cruel, most of them. They were just absent. Whatever they felt for her had been filed away under not my concern, which was its own kind of cruelty, she supposed, just the variety that people found easier to live with. The sun came fully up. She was cold and her wrists hurt and her chest ached. And she tried to hold herself upright because she had made herself a private promise in the cell that she would not let Garrett see her break. She held it, but it cost her. Then she heard them. 2 voices, high and clear, cutting through the ambient noise of the crowd. Not words at first, just sounds, the sounds of children moving quickly, the scuff of small boots on packed dirt. Papa, look, Papa, it's hurt. 2 girls pushed through to the front of the crowd. They were small and fair-haired and identically dressed in heavy winter coats that were slightly too large for them, as though they had grown into someone else's hand-me-downs. And they were maybe 6 years old, and they were staring at Evelyn with expressions that she did not have a category for. Not pity, not curiosity, but something rawer than either. Recognition. Papa, said one of them. Voice had gone quieter now, almost reverent. That's the woman. That's the woman who saved us in the snow. For the first time since Garrett had brought her out into the street, the crowd stopped making noise. Caleb Thornton had not intended to be there that morning. He had come into town for feed and to collect a package at the post office, and he had brought the twins because they had begged, and because he had not been able to say no to them consistently since the day their mother died, which was 2 years ago now, and which remained a fact so large and so heavy that he had not yet found a way to carry it without feeling its full weight every single day. He was 38 years old, and he was raising twin daughters alone, and he was managing a ranch with 3 hired hands, and he was, by every measure he could apply to himself, barely holding the whole thing together. He was a big man, not the kind of big that announces itself, but the kind that accumulates over years of physical work, wide through the shoulders with hands that showed their use. He had a beard he did not tend carefully enough and dark eyes, and the kind of face that people called serious, which was accurate. He was serious. He did not have a great deal of excess energy for anything that was not directly necessary. He had heard Garrett's voice before he'd seen the crowd, and had moved toward it with the girls before thinking to check whether this was something they should be seeing. By the time he understood what was happening, a woman tied to the post, the marshal making his pronouncements, Lily and Rose were already at the front of the crowd, and then they were saying what they were saying. He looked at the woman on the post. She was thin, dangerously so. The kind of thin that happens to people who have been malnourished for months, not the kind that happens naturally. Her coat was insufficient for the weather, and her wrists were raw where the rope cut into them, and she had a quality about her that he recognized with a start, the quality of someone who had been enduring something for so long that endurance had stopped being a decision and become simply the default state of being alive. She was looking at his daughters. He was not sure what he had expected her expression to be. Fear, maybe she was tied to a post and being offered to the crowd like a problem to be disposed of. Or blankness, the shutdown that happened to people when things got bad enough. Instead, she was looking at Lily and Rose with an expression he could only describe as wondering, as though their recognition of her was something she had not expected and did not know what to do with. Papa, Rose said. She was the one who spoke first usually. We have to help her. It's her, Lily said, with the flat certainty of a 6-year-old who does not yet understand that certainty requires justification. I know it is. He looked at the woman again. Then he looked at Garrett, who was watching him with the careful neutrality of a man recalculating something. The story the girls had told, and continued to tell, was this 2 winters ago, when he had been delayed in town, and they had been alone at the ranch with their mother. A blizzard had come down faster and harder than anyone predicted. Clara's wife had gone out to check on the animals and had collapsed in the snow. The girls had found her. They had tried to wake her. They could not. They had been out in the blizzard for close to 40 minutes, which should have killed them. And then a woman had appeared and wrapped them in a red blanket and stayed with them through the worst of it. When help arrived, the woman was gone. Clara was gone. The girls were alive. He had never been able to find the woman. He had asked quietly for a year afterward. Nobody in Silverbrook or anywhere nearby fit the description his daughters gave, dark-haired, alone, carrying a single red blanket. He had eventually filed it under the category of things that had happened and could not be fully explained, and moved on, because there was no alternative. He looked at the woman on the post, dark-haired, alone. "You said her name," Garrett called across the crowd, his voice carrying the particular sharpness of a man trying to re-establish control of a situation that is slipping. "You don't know her name." "We don't need her name," Rose said with perfect 6-year-old seriousness. Garrett's jaw tightened. Evelyn was still watching the girls. She had not, Caleb noticed this, specifically looked at him yet. Her attention was entirely on Lily and Rose, and her expression had shifted from wondering into something that looked very quietly like grief, as though she had been carrying something heavy in a dark room and someone had just turned on a light and she could finally see what she was holding. Caleb took a step forward. "I'll take her." The words came out before he had fully decided to say them. He was not certain, even afterward, at what precise moment he had made the decision, or if it was a decision in the usual sense of the word, something weighed and concluded, or if it was simply the only thing that could happen given what his daughters had said, and what he was looking at, and what he understood, in some way he could not yet articulate, about the woman tied to that post. The crowd went quiet in a different way than they had gone quiet when the girls spoke. That had been surprise. This was something else. Doubt, maybe. Reassessment. Garrett stared at him. "You understand what she's accused of," Garrett said. It was not quite a question. "I heard you," Caleb said. "You're a man with 2 young children," Garrett said. "You want to bring a woman accused of murder into your home?" "I'm a man who needs help on my ranch," Caleb said, "and my daughters appear to know her. That's enough for me." It was not entirely enough for him. He would be honest about that, at least with himself. But it was the truest sentence he could say in public, without revealing the complexity underneath it, which included his daughter's certainty and the woman's expression when she looked at them, and the fact that Garrett's whole performance had been making him deeply uneasy since it started. The theatricality of it, the way it was directed at the crowd rather than at any actual purpose of justice. He had not trusted Garrett for some time. He could not have said exactly why. There were small things, inconsistencies in how complaints were handled at the edge of his land. The Marshal's apparent friendship with Victor Harding, the way things tended to work out in Harding's favor. Nothing he could point to, just a slow accumulation of unease. Garrett looked at him for a long moment. The calculation behind the Marshal's eyes was visible if you knew to look for it. "She's your responsibility," Garrett said finally. "Anything she does, it's on you." "Understood," Caleb said. He moved through the crowd. He untied the rope from the post himself. Garrett made no move to help, and neither did the deputies. And he caught Evelyn when her knees gave out, because the rope had been on long enough that the circulation was wrong and her legs were not reliable. She grabbed his arm with both hands and pulled herself upright, and he let her take the time she needed without comment. She finally looked at him directly. Her eyes were gray. She looked at him with the careful, measuring quality of someone who has learned not to assume that help is what it presents itself to be. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough. The coffee would understand later. "My daughters say you know them," he said, not accusing. "Just saying." "I don't know their names," she said, "but I know them." He nodded. Lily had appeared on Evelyn's left side and taken her hand with the complete absence of self-consciousness that 6-year-olds manage. Rose was slightly behind, watching, which was her way. Rose gathered information before she committed. Evelyn looked down at Lily and her expression did something complicated and then settled. "You're bigger," Evelyn said to Lily. Lily looked up at her with utter seriousness. "It was 2 years ago," she said. "People get bigger in 2 years." "Right," Evelyn said. "Of course." "Do you remember the blanket?" Lily asked. Something moved through Evelyn's face. "Yes," she said. "I remember the blanket." Caleb brought the wagon around and helped her in, and she sat in the back. With both girls, Rose had joined Lily by then. Event horizon of her caution passed, and he drove them out of Silverbrook while the crowd watched and Garrett watched, and nobody said anything else. It was a 4-mile drive to the ranch. Evelyn did not speak during it. The girls talked, in the way the girls talked when they had decided someone was safe, which was to say constantly overlapping each other, topic to topic with no apparent transitions. He heard them telling her about the horses, about school, about the ranch dog, about a bird that had built a nest in the barn eaves that Rose considered a personal friend. He heard Evelyn responding in single words mostly, not because she was cold, but because she was, he suspected, running very close to her limit. He watched her in the mirror. She was holding herself upright with visible effort. Her color was wrong. She had the cough. When they arrived at the ranch, she made it as far as the porch steps and then sat down on them because she had run out of go. Not dramatically, she just sat down, precisely, like a person who knows exactly when to stop pushing. "There's a room," he said. "Not finished, but it's warm. You can sleep." She looked up at him, the measuring quality again. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He thought about that. He could have given her the practical answer. The girls, the ranch, the mystery of the blizzard. All of that was true. "Because Garrett's show this morning wasn't about justice," he said instead. "And I know the difference." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and let him help her to her feet. In the room, his foreman's old room, empty since Henderson had moved on in the fall, she sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at her hands. The wrist marks from the rope were darkening into proper bruises. He brought water and she drank it steadily, both hands around the cup. The girls had followed them in and were now occupying the doorway, side by side, watching with the particular vigilance of children who have decided something matters. "We'll figure out the rest in the morning," Caleb said, "when you've slept." Evelyn set the cup down carefully. She was fighting to keep her eyes open and losing. "She needs a blanket," Rose said from the doorway, with some urgency. "She has blankets, Rose, not a red one," Lily said very quietly. Evelyn heard that. She looked at Lily, and something shifted in her face. A warmth that had been held carefully in reserve, released now in a way she probably couldn't help. "I'm all right without the red blanket," she said. "I promise." Lily accepted this with a small serious nod. He got the girls out of the doorway and gave Evelyn the room and stood in the hall for a moment before going back to the kitchen. He had a ranch to run tomorrow and a decision to explain to 3 hired hands who were going to have questions, and a woman in his foreman's room who had been accused of murder, and 2 daughters who were more certain about her than he was prepared to be, and somewhere underneath all of it the beginning of something that felt uncomfortably like the first solid footing he had found in 2 years. He did not examine that feeling. It was too early for that, and he was not in any case a man who examined feelings as a first response. He filed it under later and went to put more wood on the fire. Outside the wind was picking up, the kind of wind that came down from the mountains when the temperature was dropping, and the sky had gone the particular flat gray that meant snow before morning. He listened to it for a moment, standing at the kitchen window. He thought about what his daughters had said in the street. "That's the woman who saved us in the snow." He thought about Evelyn's voice when she said, "I remember, the blanket." And he thought about the look on Garrett's face when Caleb had stepped forward. Not anger, not surprise, but something that was almost worse, a rapid, cold recalculation. The look of a man who had been playing a game and had suddenly found an unexpected piece on the board. Caleb didn't know what that meant yet, but he knew it meant something. He put another log on the fire and went to check the latches on the doors and windows, methodically, the way he did every night. And then he went to stand for a moment outside the door of the foreman's room. He could hear through the door the sound of breathing that had already gone slow and deep with sleep. He stood there longer than was strictly necessary. Then he went to bed. The snow came before morning as he had known it would. By the time the sun came up and he went out to start the day's work, there were 3 inches on the ground and more coming, and the world was very quiet, the way it always was after a snowfall, as though the land itself had decided to stop talking for a while. In the foreman's room, Evelyn Hart slept through all of it. She slept for 14 hours. Caleb knew because he checked twice, not out of suspicion or not entirely, but because he had a woman in his foreman's room who had spent 4 months in a cell and walked out of it with a cough that didn't sound right, and he was not the kind of man who could go to sleep himself without knowing that a sick person under his roof was still breathing. The first time he checked it was midnight and she was on her side, face toward the wall, one hand curled under her chin. The second time was just before 4 in the morning, and nothing had changed. He went back to his own bed and lay there until the sky started to pale. By the time he had coffee made and the horses fed and 2 of his hands decker and a younger man named Price briefed on the situation in the flattest possible terms, which was to say there is a woman staying in the foreman's room. She will be here for a while. Questions later, it was close to 8 o'clock, and Evelyn still had not come out. The girls were already up. They had eaten their oatmeal and were now stationed at the kitchen table with the focused patience of 2 people, waiting for something they had decided was important. Rose had her schoolbook open but was not reading it. Lily was drawing something on a scrap of paper, slowly with great seriousness. "She's still sleeping," Caleb said. "We know," Rose said. "We're waiting. You could wait in the other room." We're fine here, Lily said without looking up from her drawing. He poured his coffee and let it go. When Evelyn finally appeared in the doorway, it was 8:30, and she looked, if anything, worse than she had the day before, which he had been half prepared for, because that was sometimes how it went with people who had been holding themselves together through sheer necessity. They held it together as long as they had to, and then they stopped having to, and then the body presented its invoice. Her face was pale with 2 patches of color high on her cheeks that told him the fever was still there, and she was moving carefully, the way people move when they are not certain their body will do what they ask of it. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the girls and then at him, and there was a moment of visible reorientation, the brief, dislocated look of someone reminding themselves where they are and how they got there. "Sit down," he said. It came out more like an instruction than an invitation. He was aware of that, and did not know how to soften it without making it worse, so he just pulled out a chair and left it there. She sat. Lily immediately put the drawing in front of her. It was a rough rendering of what appeared to be 2 small figures, and a larger one, with something red draped across all 3 of them. Evelyn looked at it for a moment. "That's us," Lily said helpfully. "And you with the blanket." "I see that," Evelyn said. Her voice was still rough. "It's very good. You can keep it," Lily said, with the grand generosity of someone giving away something they made 5 minutes ago. "Thank you," Evelyn said, and folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of her coat, which she was still wearing over her dress, because the coat was probably the warmest thing she owned. He put coffee in front of her, and then eggs and bread, and she ate steadily and without self-consciousness in the way people eat when they are genuinely hungry, and past the point of performing manners about it. He noted that she did not thank him for every individual thing, which he found he respected. The thanks she had given him yesterday on the porch had been the real kind, measured and direct, and not repeated for effect. Rose watched her eat with the analytical attention she gave to things she was trying to understand. Rose had been doing this since she was 3, observing, filing, waiting until she had enough information to say something worth saying. "Do you feel sick?" Rose asked. "A little," Evelyn said. "Papa has medicine in the cabinet, the kind that tastes bad." "Most medicine does. Do you want some?" "Rose," Caleb said. "I'm just asking," Rose said. Evelyn looked at Rose with something that was close to amusement, though her face was too tired to get all the way there. "I'll be all right," she said. "I just need a few days." This turned out to be optimistic. The fever that had been sitting at a low simmer came up properly by afternoon. He found her on the porch. She had gone out for air, she said, and had not made it back in, sitting on the top step with her jeans wrapped around herself and her eyes closed. He put his hand to her forehead without thinking about it, and then wished he hadn't, not because it was inappropriate, but because the heat under his palm was alarming. "You need to be inside," he said. "I was going to come back in," she said, but she didn't argue about it. He got her back into the foreman's room and sent Price into town for the doctor, which took most of the afternoon. The doctor, a Hungarian man named Vargas, who had practiced in Silverbrook for 12 years and had no illusions about anything, examined her, did not seem surprised by what he found, left medicine and instructions, and charged Caleb $4, which Caleb paid without comment. "She's been malnourished for months," Vargas said at the door, quietly enough that the girls wouldn't hear. "The lungs aren't serious yet, but they will be if she spends time in the cold before she's recovered. Keep her warm, feed her. How long?" Vargas shrugged in the way he always shrugged, which suggested that medicine had opinions but the body had its own schedule. 2 weeks before she should do anything strenuous. Maybe less if she's strong. "Is she strong?" Vargas looked at him with the faint expression of a man who has just been asked something he finds slightly absurd. "She survived 4 months in Garrett's cell," he said. "She's as strong as they come." He left. Caleb stood in the hall for a moment, and then went to tell the girls that Evelyn would be all right, and that they needed to let her rest, which they accepted with varying degrees of grace. Lily with resignation, Rose with the unconcealed suspicion that she was being managed. "We won't bother her," Rose said. "We'll just sit in the room." "You'll bother her. We'll sit quietly." He looked at his daughters. They looked back at him. He had been losing negotiations with them since they were 4. "1 hour," he said, "and you don't talk unless she starts it." Rose's expression indicated that she considered this a partial victory. Lily was already heading down the hall. They were, against all expectations, fairly quiet. He could hear them through the closed door whispers, occasionally, and once the murmur of Evelyn's voice responding to something, but it was not the sustained assault he had braced for. At the end of the hour, he looked in and found both girls sitting on the floor beside the bed, with their backs against the wall, Lily asleep, and Rose reading her schoolbook in actual earnest, and Evelyn lying with her eyes open and her hands folded on her chest, watching the ceiling. She turned her head when she heard the door. "They wore themselves out," she said quietly. "They usually do." He looked at Lily, who was asleep sitting up, which was something she had been capable of since infancy. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've had better weeks," she said. Dry. He registered that she was dry. The doctor left medicine. "Have you taken it? The one that tastes like turpentine cut with regret?" "Yes." He almost smiled. He didn't quite, but it was a close thing. "Get some sleep," he said. She turned her head back to the ceiling. "Mr. Thornton," she said. "Caleb," a pause. "Caleb," she said it carefully, like she was checking the weight of it. "What happens when I'm better?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't stay here forever. You took me out of Garrett's hands, which I am. I don't have a word for how grateful I am for that. But I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have money. I don't have—" She stopped. Reorganized. "I'm not trying to make it your problem. I'm asking because I'd like to know what I'm working toward." He looked at her for a moment. She was watching him now, turned on her side slightly, with the measuring quality he had noticed before. The look of someone who needs true information, not the version of it that sounds kind. "I need a housekeeper," he said, "and the girls need someone. Not a replacement for their mother, that's not what I'm saying. But they're 6 and I'm out most of the day, and the woman I had helping before moved to Denver in the fall. I'm being offered employment," she said, "if you want it." She was quiet for a moment. "What about Garrett?" "Garrett is a problem I'm working on." "That's not a very specific answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not, but it's the honest one." She considered this. Outside, the wind moved through the eaves in the particular low note it made when the temperature was still dropping. "All right," she said, "I'll stay for now." "For now," he agreed. He picked up Lily. She didn't wake, which was also standard, and carried her to her room, and then came back for Rose, who had fallen asleep mid-page in her schoolbook. He got them both into their beds and stood in the hall between their 2 doors for a moment, listening to the house be quiet. It was a different kind of quiet than it had been yesterday, though he couldn't have said precisely why. Over the following 10 days, Evelyn recovered in pieces. Not smoothly, not in the clean upward arc of recovery that people describe when they tell the story later. It went in fits: 2 good days, followed by a day when the fever came back and she stayed in bed, and the cough was bad enough that he could hear it from the kitchen. Then 3 good days. Then a morning she came to the kitchen table looking 5 years younger than she had the week before, and ate 3 eggs and most of a loaf of bread, and helped Lily with her letters while Rose corrected them both, and the day after that she was back in bed by noon. He did not comment on any of it. He brought food when she was in the room and did not push her when she was out of it, and paid attention from a middle distance in the way that felt appropriate and decent without being pointed. On the 8th day she started to talk. Not a lot, and not about anything central at first. She asked about the ranch, how many head of cattle, how many acres under cultivation, whether the soil this far north was any good for vegetable growing. He answered her questions, and she listened with the attention of someone filing information for later use. She asked about the girls' schooling, whether there was a schoolhouse in Silverbrook, what their teacher was like. She asked about the town's history in a general way, how long it had been settled, and who the original families were, and whether there was a land registry office. He told her there was. He watched her file that too. "You're building a picture of something," he said. On the 9th day, when they were sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the girls were outside with Price, learning to no good purpose how to swing a lasso, she looked at him over her cup. "What kind of picture?" "I don't know yet, that's why I mentioned it." She was quiet for a moment. The cough had mostly settled still there in the mornings, but quieter. Her color was better. She had put on enough weight that she no longer looked like the cold could carry her off. "Daniel Hart," she said. "The man I was supposed to marry." "Did you know him?" "Somewhat. He was a few miles east of here. Kept to himself mostly. Came to town for supplies to the occasional meeting. Quiet man. Careful. Careful how? Careful with what he said. Careful about who he trusted." Caleb set down his cup. He and Victor Harding had a dispute about 2 years back. Water rights a creek that ran along the edge of Daniel's eastern acreage. Harding wanted to redirect it for his cattle operation. Daniel said no and filed with the land office. He won. Evelyn was very still. "And Harding let it go?" "Harding let it appear to go," Caleb said. "There's a difference." She looked at him steadily. "You know something," she said. "About Daniel. About what happened to him." "I know enough to be careful," he said. Which is the same thing Daniel knew in the end, and it didn't protect him. "It didn't protect him," she said quietly, turning something over. "But maybe it was supposed to protect someone else." He did not ask what she meant by that. He thought he understood it, and he needed to think about it more before he said anything either way. That night, after the girls were in bed, he sat at the kitchen table, with a lamp and a map of the territory he had purchased from the surveyor's office the previous spring. He spread it out and looked at the land parcels, and thought about the parcels that had changed hands in the last 3 years, and whose hands they had changed into, and what pattern, if you looked at it from high enough above, those changes made. The pattern was not subtle once you knew to look for it. On the 11th day, she found the red blanket. He had not put it there deliberately. It had been in a chest in the foreman's room since Clara died. Not because it had belonged to Clara, but because it had been brought back to the ranch after the blizzard, left behind by whoever had used it, and he had kept it without entirely knowing why. The chest also held some of Henderson's forgotten belongings, and a few things that had been in the room when he bought the ranch. And it was the kind of chest that accumulated objects, and was not opened often. She had been going through the room in a practical way. It was her room for now, and she was practical. And she had opened the chest for some reason, probably looking for extra blankets given the cold, and she had found it at the bottom. He knew about it because she came to find him in the barn with the blanket in her hands and a look on her face that was harder to read than most of her expressions. "This is mine," she said. "Where did you get this?" He straightened up from the harness he had been mending, looked at the blanket. It was red wool, faded now from 2 years in washing, with one corner that was darker than the rest a stain that had not fully come out. "The girls had it," he said, "after the blizzard. When I found them, they were wrapped in it. I kept it." Something moved through her face. "My grandmother made it," she said. "She gave it to me the winter before she died. It was the last thing she ever gave me. When I found the children in the snow, I wrapped them in it, and I meant to get it back, but then everything, she stopped. I never thought I'd see it again." "It's yours," he said immediately. "It was always yours." She looked at him. Then she looked at the blanket in her hands, turning it once, feeling the weight of it. "I was traveling through," she said, "on my way to Silverbrook. The blizzard came down so fast. I had been walking from the stage stop because the coach couldn't make it through the road and I thought I could. I shouldn't have been walking. I knew that. But I had a date to arrive and I didn't want to be late because—" She almost smiled, or the memory of almost smiling at herself crossed her face. "Because I thought it would be a bad impression. To be late. To the man I was going to marry. And you found the girls. I almost didn't see them. The snow was white everywhere. And then there was this small shape. And then 2 small shapes, and I thought at first it was— I don't know what I thought. My mind was going by then. I was very cold." She folded the blanket over her arm. "I stayed with them. I thought if I kept moving I could keep them warm. I don't know how long we were out there." "About 3 hours," he said. According to the girls, she absorbed that. "Their mother was already gone when I got there," he said. The words came out flat, because that was the only way he had found to say them, without the whole weight of what they meant collapsing onto the sentence. Clara had been out looking for them, and the cold, it was very bad that night. She had a weakness in her chest from the previous winter. She shouldn't have been out in it. He stopped. She went out anyway because they were her children. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "For your loss, I mean that." "Not as a phrase, as an actual thing." "I know," he said. And he did know somehow from the directness of it. "Thank you for what you did for them. I should have said that directly before now. You took me off a post in front of half the town," she said. "I think we're even." He almost smiled again. This time he let it go a small way. She took the blanket back to her room, and he went back to the harness, and outside the wind was cold and clear, and the sky was the hard bright blue that came after snow. And it was, he thought, a fairly ordinary morning except for the specific texture of it, which was not ordinary at all. Garrett came on the 13th day. Caleb heard the horses before he heard anything else, 2 horses coming up the road at the deliberate pace of official purpose rather than urgency. He was outside when they came through the gate, Garrett and 2 deputies, none of whom were the young man Cord. These were older men, with the settled, incurious faces of people who had been following orders long enough that they had stopped thinking of themselves as the ones giving them. Evelyn was inside. The girls were at the table with their school books. He had sent Price out to the east fence an hour ago, and Decker was in the lower barn. He stood in the yard and waited for Garrett to come to him, which Garrett did, pulling up his horse and looking down with the performance of easy authority that Caleb had always found grating. "Thornton," Garrett said. "Marshal, how's our guest?" "Recovering," Caleb said. "She was sick." The doctor came. Garrett looked at the house. Caleb did not look at the house. "I want to speak with her. She's resting. I'm sure she can manage a few minutes." "She's resting," Caleb said again, in exactly the same tone, and waited. Garrett's jaw worked slightly. He was a man who was accustomed to a particular response to his authority, which was compliance, and he was recalibrating for the absence of it. He had been doing this since the morning in the street, and it had not improved his opinion of Caleb, which was fine, since the regard was not mutual. "She's still accused of murder," Garrett said. "My taking her into your custody doesn't change that." "There's no formal charge," Caleb said. "If there were a formal charge, there'd have been a trial." "There hasn't been a trial. There's been 4 months of imprisonment without charge, which is a different matter, and one I've been giving some thought to." Something shifted in Garrett's expression, a tightening, almost invisible. You've been giving it thought, I have. On what basis? On the basis that I'm a citizen of this territory, and I have an interest in how the law is applied in it, Caleb said. Same as anyone. Garrett was quiet for a moment. One of the deputies behind him shifted in his saddle. The other one looked at a point somewhere to the left of Caleb's head and stayed there. She say anything to you? Garrett asked. Casual. Almost too casual. About the night Hart died? She told me she arrived in town and found him dead, Caleb said. Which is what she told you. That's the story, sure. You have a different one? Garrett looked at him with the particular contempt of a man who has decided to be patient. I'm going to need to speak with her, Thornton. You can make this easy, or you can make it complicated. She's recovering from a fever, Caleb said. When she's well enough for official conversations, I'll let you know. A pause. You're making an enemy, Garrett said. Not threatening, or not only threatening. Almost, Caleb thought. Informational. As though Garrett was giving him something and expected it to land. I'm keeping a sick woman from being harassed, Caleb said. Those aren't the same thing. Garrett held his gaze for another moment. Then he turned his horse, and the two deputies followed, and they rode back down the road the way they had come, at the same deliberate official pace. Caleb stood in the yard until they were through the gate and out of sight. Then he went inside. Evelyn was not at the table. She was standing at the kitchen window to the side of it, not directly in front of it, but to the side where she could see out without being easily seen from outside. She had been watching. He asked if you'd said anything, Caleb said. I heard, she said. She turned from the window. Her face was careful. He was at Daniel's house the night Daniel died. The kitchen went quiet. How do you know? Caleb asked. Because I saw him. She said it without drama, without the buildup of someone who has been waiting to say an important thing, just directly as though it was simply the next true sentence. When I was walking up Birch Road, before I reached the house, I saw Garrett coming out of Daniel's gate. He was moving fast. Not running, but fast. He didn't see me. I was across the road and the light wasn't good. And then I found Daniel, and Garrett came back in the back door. And by then it was too late for my seeing him to matter because I was already the woman standing over the body. Caleb sat down slowly. You didn't tell him this, he said. I told the deputy. The young one cored. The first week. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Not anger. Exactly. But the long residue of what anger becomes when it has nowhere to go for 4 months. Nothing happened. I don't know if Cord told him and Garrett ignored it, or if Cord never passed it along. Either way, it disappeared Evelyn. He said her name carefully. If Garrett was at that house, then he knows exactly what happened to Daniel, she said. Yes. That's what I've been thinking about for 4 months. The logs in the stove settled with a soft, muffled collapse of ash. Outside, Price was whistling something tuneless in the direction of the barn. The girls were very quiet at the table, and he glanced at them, and Rose was looking at her schoolbook, and Lily was looking at Evelyn with an expression that was too old for 6. There's more, Evelyn said. Tell me. She sat down across from him. In the cell, prisoners talk. There was a man 2 cells down, for most of my first month a ranch hand, name of Ellis. He'd had a dispute with someone over wages, and Garrett had arrested him for it, which was already a strange use of the law. Ellis had worked on Victor Harding's operation 3 years before. He'd left or been run off. He wasn't clear about which, and he'd seen things while he was there. She paused. He told me about land deeds. Harding's people were filing claims on land that already had owners, using documents that had been adjusted, changed. Ellis had seen 2 of them being altered in Harding's office. He'd seen a man he knew was a county clerk coming and going from Harding's ranch at hours when it wasn't social. Did Ellis tell anyone else? He tried, before I met him. That's why he ended up in the cell. She looked at her hands. He wasn't there when I woke up one morning. Garrett said he'd been released. I don't know if that's true. Caleb turned this over. The map he'd been looking at. The land parcels. The pattern that wasn't subtle once you knew to look for it. Daniel Hart, he said slowly, was filing his own investigation. Before he died, I didn't know the details, but I heard from someone at the land office in passing that he'd been making inquiries. About deeds, about ownership records. Evelyn looked up at him. He wasn't just a farmer who irritated Harding over water rights, Caleb said. He'd found something, and someone knew he'd found it. The word someone sat between them on the table, and they both knew what it meant, and neither of them said the name out loud in front of the girls. Rose put down her pencil. Papa, she said, in the tone she used when she had decided that whatever the adults were doing near her was something she was entitled to participate in. Are we in danger? Caleb looked at his daughter. He believed in telling his children the truth in the version they were able to carry. Not right now, he said. But I want you to stay close to the ranch for a few days. Rose considered this because of the marshal. Because I want to know where you are, he said. That's all. Rose accepted this with the expression of someone who knows she is being given the child-safe version of something, but is choosing for now to work with it. Lily had not taken her eyes off Evelyn. "Are you going to be all right?" she asked. Evelyn looked at Lily. The child's directness was, Caleb had noticed, something Evelyn handled better than most adults. She didn't flinch from it or try to redirect it. She just met it. "I've made it this far," Evelyn said. "I'm going to try for a little further." That night, after the girls were in bed and the house had gone to its nighttime quiet, Caleb sat at the kitchen table again with the territorial map, and this time he was not alone. Evelyn sat across from him with her coffee and her red blanket over her shoulders. She had taken to wearing it around the house, and he found he didn't mind the sight of it, and they went through what they knew and what they could prove and what they could not, and what the distance was between those two things. It was a such distance. What they knew, Garrett had been at Daniel's house the night he died. Daniel had been investigating Harding's land fraud operation. Ellis, the ranch hand, had witnessed document tampering. Evelyn had been used as a convenient person to blame. What they could prove, almost none of it, without witnesses willing to speak and documents willing to surface. What they needed, the evidence Daniel had gathered before he was killed, because Daniel was a careful man, and careful men, in Caleb's experience, did not gather evidence of something dangerous without putting it somewhere that wasn't simply their own house. "He sent letters," Evelyn said suddenly. "He wrote to me. 6 months of letters. They were practical letters, mostly. What the land was like, what the town was like. But there were things in them." She stopped. "There was a letter in November. He said he had been in correspondence with someone in the territorial capital about some land matters. He said he hoped to have it settled before I arrived. I thought he meant the water dispute. He might have meant more than that. He might have." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't have the letters anymore. They were in my bag when Garrett arrested me. I don't know what happened to them." "Garrett would have them," Caleb said, "or they're gone. Or both," she said. He looked at the map. At Daniel's parcel east of his own. At Harding's land, large and spreading. The parcels that had been his 3 years ago, and the parcels that had been added since. "I have a brother," Evelyn said. "Samuel. I wrote to him twice from the cell. I don't know if the letters got through. But if they did, Samuel is not the kind of man who leaves things alone. Where is he?" "Last I knew, Kansas. But that was over a year ago." She wrapped the blanket a little tighter. "He'd come if he knew. He'd come." Caleb thought about the pieces of this, and how they fit, and how far they still were from something he could take to anyone who would listen. They were a rancher and a woman who had been in a cell for 4 months, with a story that had no witness who would currently commit to it, and no documentation that wasn't in someone else's possession. They needed more. He was thinking about where to get it when the sound came from outside. Not loud, not threatening, just the sound of a horse moving in the dark at a distance, and then silence. Price was asleep in the bunkhouse. Decker was on the porch, which was his habit before turning in. He heard Decker's boots shift on the boards outside. Then Decker said quietly, "Through the door, Caleb. Someone coming up the road." He rose. Evelyn rose too, and he put out a hand not to stop her, but to indicate she should wait, and she held, which told him she understood the distinction. He went to the door, a single rider. Lantern in hand, which was a good sign people who came in the dark meaning harm did not usually carry lights. Coming at a deliberate pace, he stepped onto the porch. The rider came through the gate and into the pool of light from the barn lantern, and Caleb looked at him, and then he heard Evelyn make a sound behind him. She had not stayed back after all. She was at the door, and she was looking at the rider, with an expression that had gone from careful and contained to something open and undone all at once. The rider was a man about 30, with dark hair and Evelyn's same gray eyes, and the road-worn look of someone who had been moving for a long time, and was not done moving, only stopping. He looked at Evelyn. "I got your letter," Samuel Hart said. "Both of them. I've been on the road for 11 days. He swung down from the horse. "Tell me everything." Samuel Hart was not what Caleb had expected, though he had not spent much time forming expectations. He was younger than Caleb by several years, lean in the way of men who traveled more than they ate, with the same quality his sister had, of watching everything before committing to a response. He came inside without being asked twice, accepted coffee without ceremony, and sat at the kitchen table with his coat still on, and looked at Evelyn across the lamp with the focused attention of someone taking inventory of damage. "You're thinner," he said. "You're observant," she said. "Evelyn, I know," she said. "I'm all right. I'm better than I was." He looked at her for another moment, the kind of look that is not doubt exactly, but is the testing of a claim against visible evidence, and then he appeared to make a decision about it and moved on. He had brought things with him. This became clear over the next hour as he laid out, in careful sequence, what 11 days on the road had actually consisted of. He had not simply traveled. He had stopped in 3 towns between Kansas and Silverbrook, and in each town he had asked questions, and in 2 of them he had found people willing to answer. "I got Evelyn's first letter in February," he said, spreading his hands flat on the table. "The second one came a week after. By then I already knew she wasn't getting out of that cell through any official channel, so I started working the other angle. He looked at Caleb. You know a man named Arthur Voss, land surveyor, Caleb said. Works out of the territorial capital. I've used him. He used to work for Harding, Samuel said, about 4 years ago. Left under circumstances he describes as a difference of professional opinion, which from context appears to mean Harding asked him to falsify some survey measurements and Voss declined and found himself without a contract. He paused. Voss has been waiting for someone to ask him the right questions for 3 years. I asked them. The table was quiet. The stove ticked. Evelyn was watching her brother with an expression that was neither surprised nor entirely unsurprised, the expression of someone who knows a person well enough to have expected something of this order, but is still confronting the reality of it. What did he tell you? Caleb asked. That the land parcel Harding filed on the Mercer family, 2 families north of you. Thornton was surveyed under a different boundary than what was submitted to the land office. The submitted survey showed the Mercer property line 60 yards east of where it actually ran. 60 yards that happened to include the only reliable water source on that acreage. Samuel picked up his coffee. The Mercers lost their land 18 months ago. Filed a complaint that went nowhere. They're in Denver now. I know them, Caleb said. I didn't know the survey had been altered. Most people don't know because the record at the land office shows the submitted version. The original field notes are different. Voss kept copies. Evelyn said quietly. Daniel found this. Samuel turned to look at her. I think so. I think Daniel Hart was the one who connected the survey discrepancy to Harding's land office contact, and I think he had gotten far enough along that someone decided he needed to stop. He set down the cup. I made a stop at Daniel's property on the way here. It's been searched, thoroughly. Whoever went through it wasn't being subtle. They were looking for something specific. They didn't find it, Evelyn said. It was not a question. Samuel looked at her with the slight, careful expression of someone preparing to say something consequential. How do you know? Because Daniel was a careful man, she said. He said so in his letters. Not about himself, but the way careful people reveal themselves without meaning to. He made copies of things. He kept things separate. He wouldn't have kept everything in one place. No, Samuel agreed. He wouldn't have. He reached into his coat, the inner pocket, the kind that sits close to the body and requires deliberate intent to reach, and brought out an envelope. It was sealed, addressed in a hand that was not Samuel's, and it had been opened and resealed with what looked like library paste, imperfect around the edges. He put it on the table between them. This was at the post office in Millhaven, he said. 14 miles east. Daniel mailed it to himself to a box number he'd registered under a different name about 2 weeks before he died. He paid 3 months in advance on the box. The postmaster held it per the registration terms. He looked at the envelope. The postmaster in Millhaven is 72 years old and deeply committed to the position that mail is mail and belongs to its addressee and nobody else, which is the main reason it still exists. Caleb looked at the envelope. Evelyn looked at it. Neither of them reached for it. What's in it? Caleb asked. I read, Samuel said without apology. I needed to know what we were working with before I came here. There are 4 pages of Daniel's handwriting financial records, dates, names. 2 of those names are men at the land office in the territorial capital. One is a county commissioner 3 counties over, and one he paused. One is Wade Garrett. The lamp flame moved in some small current of air neither of them could identify. Garrett's name appears 3 times, Samuel continued. Once in connection with a payment received from Harding's account in October of last year. Once in connection with the Ellis matter, the ranch hand. There's a note about him being arrested on manufactured grounds after speaking to a reporter in town. And once with a date, November 14th, 2 weeks before Daniel died. November 14th. Caleb did not know the significance of it yet, but Evelyn had gone very still in the way she went still when something aligned with something she already knew. That's the date of the letter, she said. The letter Daniel wrote me where he mentioned the territorial capital. The correspondence, he said, he hoped to have settled before I arrived. She looked at Samuel. He was telling me what he was doing, not directly. I think he was being careful, but he was leaving a trail. In case something happened. In case something happened, Samuel repeated. Yes, I think that's right. Caleb picked up the envelope. He turned it over in his hands without opening it, feeling the weight of what was inside 4 pages, which was not very much paper for something that had cost at least one man his life. There's more, Samuel said, in my bag. I didn't bring it inside yet. He looked at Caleb directly. I need to know something before I do. I need to know whether you're in this, or whether you're holding my sister as an act of charity that ends when things get complicated. Caleb put the envelope down. He looked at Samuel Hart across the table, at the gray eyes that were Evelyn's eyes, at the road dirt still on his collar, at the particular quality of a man who had ridden 11 days because his sister needed him, and had used every one of those days productively. I have 2 daughters, Caleb said. This woman saved their lives 2 years ago. Garrett used her as a weapon against a dead man's investigation and came to my yard demanding I hand her back. My name is on the land your cousin registered. He stopped. And I've known something was wrong in this territory for 2 years without having enough pieces to say so out loud. I'm in. Samuel looked at him for a moment longer. Then he nodded. Once the same kind of nod his sister used when she had made a decision. He went outside and came back with a leather saddlebag, which he set on the table and opened. What came out of it was not dramatic in appearance. A collection of folded papers, a small bound ledger, and a cylindrical tin of the kind used for storing rolled documents. But Evelyn made a sound when she saw the ledger, a small, involuntary sound, and reached for it. That's Daniel's handwriting, she said. His personal account book, Samuel said. Not his financial records, his other accounts. What he observed and when. It was under the floorboard in his barn. Whoever searched the house didn't go as far as the barn. Evelyn held the ledger carefully the way she had held the red blanket, with the awareness of what a thing had cost. They sat at that table until close to 2 a.m, reading. The picture that emerged from Daniel Hart's careful documentation was not complicated. It was simple, the way most terrible things are simple, when you strip away the arrangement of circumstances designed to make them look inevitable. Victor Harding had come to the territory 8 years ago with money and ambition and a tolerance for methods that other men considered off-limits. He had built legitimately at first, purchased land at fair prices, ran cattle, made a profit. But legitimate acquisition had a ceiling, and Harding was a man who found ceilings intolerable. What he had built over the last 4 years was a system. A county clerk named Fellows who could alter recorded deeds for a fee. A marshal who could manage the human problems that arose when people noticed what was being done to them. And a surveyor until that surveyor declined, who could make the geometry of land say whatever Harding needed it to say. 7 families had lost land. 3 of them had lost water rights that made their remaining land unworkable, which produced the same result more slowly. The Mercers were the ones Samuel had found Voss's documentation on. The others were scattered 2 families in Denver now, one in New Mexico, one that Daniel's notes described only as gone, whereabouts unknown, which had its own weight. Daniel had begun investigating 8 months before his death. He had started, as Caleb had suspected, with the water rights dispute, his own water rights, and followed the thread from there. He had contacted a lawyer in the territorial capital named Bridger. He had obtained copies of the original survey field notes through Voss, who had been waiting for this conversation. He had identified Fellows at the land office and documented 3 specific deed alterations with enough precision that the falsification was apparent when the documents were held side by side. And then, 2 weeks before he died, he had done something that had either been very brave or very foolish or both, which was to send a formal letter to the territorial governor's office, outlining what he had found and requesting an official inquiry. He sent it, Evelyn said from across the table, where she had been reading the final pages of the ledger. He documented sending it. November 16th. 2 weeks before he died, Caleb said. Someone at the governor's office told Harding, Samuelson said. It was not a question. Or someone between the governor's office and Harding. The letter got there and the wrong person read it. Which means there's a copy in the governor's file, Caleb said. Somewhere, possibly, Samuel said, if it wasn't pulled. They sat with that. The practical problem of what they had was this. Daniel's ledger and his letter copies and Voss's field note copies were compelling evidence of the fraud. The financial records naming Garrett were compelling evidence of corruption. What they did not have was a witness to Daniel's death, and without that, without someone who could place Garrett at the scene with knowledge of what he had done there, the rest of it was circumstantial in ways that a skilled lawyer could manage. Evelyn's had seen Garrett leave Daniel's house. But Evelyn's word, as a woman who had spent 4 months accused of the murder in question, was going to require corroboration. Cord, Evelyn said. Both men looked at her, the young deputy. Cord. She was looking at a point in the middle distance, working something out. He took my letters. I think he actually sent them. I think that's why Samuel got them. Which means Cord was not entirely comfortable with what was happening. He brought me extra food when he could. He wasn't cruel. He looked embarrassed. She came back to the present and looked at Caleb. He's a witness to my treatment in that cell. He knows there was never a formal charge filed, and he may know more than that. Garrett's deputy isn't going to speak against Garrett, Samuel said. He might, Evelyn said, if he understood what his options were. And if he understood that the thing he's been an accessory to is larger than just keeping an uncomfortable prisoner in a cell. That's a big if, Samuel said. Most of this is a big if, she said. We work with what we have. Caleb had been quiet through this last exchange, thinking about something else. He was thinking about the town meeting, the monthly gathering in the town hall. where Silverbrook's residents came together to discuss civic matters, and where Garrett routinely made announcements, and where the social fabric of the town was in its imperfect and fractious way maintained. The next one was in 9 days. Garrett will be there, he said. The others looked at him. He'll be there, and the town will be there, Caleb said. The same people who stood in the street and watched him tie Evelyn to a post. He looked at Evelyn. You said it yourself. You want people to understand what happened. Not just the legal case, but what actually happened. The town meeting is the place for that. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was careful about the weight it was carrying, You want me to stand up in front of the same people who watched and say nothing? Yes, he said, with the evidence. And with Samuel beside you. And with me, Garrett will argue. He'll call it fabricated. He will, Caleb said, and we need to be ready for that. Which means between now and 9 days from now, we need the lawyer Bridger if Samuel can reach him, and we need to make copies of everything so that if Garrett tries to take the originals, there's nothing he can take that matters. Samuel was looking at him with an expression that had shifted from the evaluative wariness of the first hour to something more like acknowledgement. You've been thinking about this longer than tonight, he said. I've been thinking about Harding for 2 years, Caleb said. I just didn't have the shape of it. All right, Samuel said. He pulled the ledger back toward himself and opened it to the first page and reached for the pencil behind his ear. Then let's figure out the shape. The 9 days that followed were the most tightly wound of Caleb's life, and his life had contained some wound-tight days. He ran the ranch in the mornings, because the ranch did not stop needing to be run because its owner had other concerns, and he spent his afternoons and most of his evenings in the kitchen with Samuel and Evelyn and the territorial map and the stacks of documents that Samuel had reorganized into a sequence that told the story from the beginning, clearly enough that a reasonable person could follow it without being a lawyer. Evelyn's health continued to improve. The cough was mostly gone by the 4th day, and the color in her face had settled from the feverish patches into something steadier. She was not entirely well. She was thinner than she should be, and tired more easily than she would have before the cell, but she was present in the way she had not been in the first weeks. The specific presence of someone who has located themselves and knows what they are doing. She took the girls to the barn in the afternoons when the weather permitted, which freed up the kitchen for Samuel's work, and also, Caleb noticed, seemed to do something for all 3 of them that he did not entirely have words for. He watched them once from the barn door, Evelyn sitting on a hay bale with Lily in her lap, both of them examining something Lily had found, while Rose stood a few feet away and provided commentary that neither of them had asked for. The red blanket was folded over the bale beside her. He did not go in. He stood in the door for a moment and then went back to work. On the 5th day, he went into town. He did not go to Silverbrook. He went to Millhaven 14 miles east, where the postmaster had held Daniel's envelope for 3 months, and from there he sent a telegram to the lawyer Bridger's office in the territorial capital. Samuel had drafted the message in a form that conveyed urgency and enough specificity to be taken seriously without spelling out in a wire that could be read by the wrong hands what exactly they were sitting on. The response came the next morning. Bridger was aware of the Daniel Hart matter and had been waiting for contact. He would come. He also, while in Millhaven, went to the county courthouse and asked, as a matter of public record, to see the land deed filings for the past 4 years. The clerk, a different clerk than the one in Silverbrook, a young woman with ink-stained fingers and no particular interest in why he was asking, brought the ledgers, and he sat with them for 2 hours and made notes and confirmed 3 of the 4 alterations Daniel had documented, the ones that were visible to a careful eye without needing Voss's field notes. He was on his way back to the horse when he heard his name. He turned. Cord, the young deputy, still in the coat that marked him as Garrett's man, was standing at the edge of the courthouse steps, looking at him with an expression that Caleb could only describe as a man standing at the edge of a bridge deciding whether to jump. I heard you were in town, Cord said. Word travels, Caleb said. I heard. Cord stopped. He was young, maybe 23, with a wide, unguarded face that had not yet learned to hide what it was feeling, which was significant internal conflict. I heard Miss Hart is at your place. She is. She's all right? She's recovering. Caleb watched him. You sent her letters. The ones she wrote from the cell. Cord's jaw tightened. I sent them. She thought you might not. She wasn't sure. I wasn't sure either, Cord said. Garrett checks outgoing mail sometimes. I sent them from here, not from Silverbrook. On my day off, he looked at his boots. I know it's not much. No, Caleb said. It's not. But it's what got her brother here. He waited. Is there something you want to say to me, Cord? The young man looked up. The bridge-jumping expression was worse now, more acute. Garrett told me she was guilty, he said. When she first came in, he told me the evidence was clear and she'd done it and she needed to be held until arrangements could be made. I believed him in the beginning. And later, Cord's hands were in his coat pockets, and one of them was moving, restless, fingers working against the lining. She kept saying she'd seen him on Birch Road. Coming out of Hart's Gate, he swallowed. I didn't see Garrett on Birch Road that night, but I know where Garrett was that afternoon, because he told me he was going out to Harding's ranch, and I should handle anything that came up. And I know he wasn't back when he said he would be. I know because I waited for him, and he was 2 hours late, and when I asked, he said he'd been delayed at Harding's. But Harding's is west of town, Caleb said. And Birch Road is east, Cord said quietly. Yes. The courthouse steps were cold. A wagon went past on the main street. Somewhere a door opened and closed. Will you say that? Caleb asked.
Formally.
To a lawyer, and if it comes to it, to the town? The pause was long enough that Caleb had time to consider what it would mean if the answer was no, and what it would take to find another path. Then Cord said, I need to not be in Garrett's jail when I do it. That can be arranged, Caleb said. Bridger arrived on the 7th day. He was a small, energetic man in his 50s with wire spectacles and a traveling coat that had seen considerable territory, and he shook Samuel's hand with the relief of a man who had been waiting a long time for a dam to break. He had, as it turned out, received Daniel Hart's letter. He had not been able to act on it alone. It described what Daniel knew, but did not include the documentation to support it. But he had kept the letter and had been watching for exactly the kind of contact Samuel's telegram represented. He spread his own papers on the kitchen table beside Samuel's, and for 1 hour it was too many voices in a small space, everyone talking at once and over each other, which was messy and unglamorous and not at all the clean process of strategy that stories tend to describe. Evelyn sat at the end of the table and listened and said very little, but when she spoke, Bridger listened with the attentiveness of a man who understands which voice in a room is the load-bearing one. The recording, Bridger said. In the second hour, when the overlapping had sorted itself into sequence, he was looking at an entry in Daniel's ledger. Hart references here a recorded account, an account of a conversation. He had a dictaphone, Samuel said, a recording device. He mentions it in his personal correspondence with Evelyn. He purchased it in the capital specifically for this purpose. Then where is it? Bridger asked. We don't know, Samuel said. We haven't found it. The room was quiet. Caleb thought about Daniel's barn, about the envelope under the floor, about careful men and where they hid things. He sent himself the ledger and the financial records, Caleb said slowly, to the Millhaven box. He sent the most important documentation off the property because he knew the property would be searched. He looked at Samuel. He sent himself the papers. Did he send anything else to that address before he died? Samuel looked at him. Then Samuel looked at the table, in the specific way of someone arriving at an answer they should have reached sooner. He reached into the saddlebag, the same bag he'd brought 11 days ago, still sitting in the corner because none of them had thought to put it away, and dug to the bottom and produced a small tin, cylindrical, about the size of a man's fist. He put it on the table. The postmaster gave me everything in the box, he said. I assumed the tin was empty. He stopped. I didn't check. Bridger picked it up. He opened it with the careful deliberateness of a man who has learned that important things tend to be where you didn't think to look. Inside was a small metal cylinder of the type used in early recording devices, recording medium. Scratched and slightly dented from travel but intact. Evelyn put both her hands flat on the table, and for the first time in all the days Caleb had been watching her hold herself together, he saw her hands shake. Getting the recording played required the device itself, which Bridger's office happened to have, an elderly dictaphone purchased for exactly these kinds of legal purposes and rarely used. He sent it to his office, and his clerk arrived the next morning with it, a full day earlier than expected, which was either luck or the result of a young clerk who had read his employer's message and decided pace mattered. They played it in the kitchen on the morning of the 8th day. With the girls at school, Caleb had arranged for Price to take them and collect them so that they were not in the house for this, and Cord sitting at the table with them, his hat in his hands. Daniel Hart's voice came out of the machine quiet and slightly distorted by the recording process, but clear enough to understand. It was the voice of a man who was alone and who knew what he was doing was dangerous and who had decided to do it anyway. He spoke for 11 minutes. He named names. He described dates and transactions. He described the conversation, and here was the thing that changed the air in the room. He described a conversation he had recorded between Fellows, the land clerk, and a third party, who was not identified on the recording by name but was identified in Daniel's note accompanying the tin as W.G., and who described, in language that was not careful, because it had been conducted in private, the arrangement by which complaints against Harding's land operations would be managed. When the recording ended, the kitchen was completely silent. Cord had stopped turning his hat in his hands. He was sitting very still and looking at the table. That's Garrett's voice, he said finally, the other voice, the one he doesn't name. He looked up. I'd know it anywhere. Bridger was writing. Samuel was writing. Evelyn was not writing. She was sitting with her hands folded in front of her and looking at the recording machine with an expression that Caleb could not classify, except that it seemed to be a reckoning of some kind, private and prolonged. He did not say anything. He let her have it. After a moment she looked up and found him watching, and she did not look away. "Tomorrow," she said. "The town meeting is tomorrow." "Yes," he said. She unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table, steadying herself, or perhaps just feeling the solidity of it, the actual physical fact of a surface that held. "Then we'd better make copies tonight," she said. They made copies. All four of them, and Cord wrote in a labored but legible hand and produced 3 copies of his own formal statement, signed and witnessed by Bridger, documenting what he knew about the night of Daniel's death and what he knew about Evelyn's imprisonment and the absence of any formal charge. He left his deputy's badge on the table when he was done, which none of them had asked him to do, and which he did not explain, and which none of them commented on. By midnight, the originals were in Bridger's traveling case, and the copies were divided among 4 separate locations: Samuel's saddlebag, a locked box in the Millhaven courthouse clerk's office to which Bridger had arranged access, the inside pocket of Evelyn's coat, and the floorboards of Caleb's barn, which had already proven its utility as a hiding place. Caleb sat at the kitchen table after the others had gone to bed and looked at the lamp and listened to the house. Decker was on the porch. Price was in the bunkhouse. Samuel was in the spare room. Evelyn was in the foreman's room. The girls were in their beds. It was not a small thing what tomorrow was. He was clear-eyed enough about that to sit with it honestly. It was possible that Garrett would manage the room. It was possible that the people of Silverbrook, given the choice between what they had been told and what a stranger and a woman accused of murder were telling them, would choose what they had been told, because that was easier, because Garrett was familiar and Evelyn was not, because discomfort preferred the known shape of a lie over the jagged shape of a truth that required something of them. It was possible. He did not pretend otherwise, but he thought about Daniel Hart, who had been a careful man and had acted anyway. He thought about Cord, who had looked at the badge on the table for a long moment before leaving without it. He thought about 7 families in their land and where they were now. And he thought about Evelyn, standing at the window on the day Garrett had come to the yard, watching from the side so she couldn't be seen, with the careful, measuring look of someone deciding what she was able to endure, and finding the answer was more than anyone had given her credit for. He put out the lamp and went to bed. In the foreman's room, he heard her moving, not restless, just present, awake. He lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around its people and thought about the morning coming, and whether they were ready for it, and concluded, honestly, that they were as ready as they were going to be. That would have to be enough. The morning of the town meeting came in gray and cold, the kind of morning that made no promises about what the day intended to do. Caleb was up before the sun. He did not sleep well in the final hours. Not from fear exactly, but from the particular alertness of a man whose mind has decided that rest is no longer the priority and has moved on without asking permission. He made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the dark lighten by degrees over the eastern ridge, and thought about nothing specific, which was sometimes the most honest preparation available. Evelyn appeared at 5:30. She was dressed already, her dark hair pinned back, wearing the better of the 2 dresses she owned, the blue wool she had arrived in, cleaned and pressed. She had her coat over her arm, and the red blanket was not with her, which he understood without being told. But today was not a day for the things that comforted. Today required a different kind of armor. She poured coffee and stood on the other side of the window, and they were quiet together for a few minutes, which did not feel awkward. They had gotten past awkward somewhere in the second week, without either of them remarking on it. "How many people typically come to the town meeting?" she asked. "Depends on what's on the agenda. 50, 60 on a normal month. More if something's stirred up." He looked at her. "Garrett usually speaks first, sets the tone. He's good at it." "I know," she said. "I've heard him do it. You'll need to wait for the right moment. Not too early. If you go before he's committed to his version, he has room to adjust. Not too late, or the room will have already decided." He paused. "Bridger will know the moment. Watch him." She nodded, looking at the window. Then she said, "The girls shouldn't come. I've arranged for them to stay with the Alderman family. Their daughter is friends with Rose. Rose won't like it." "Rose doesn't like most things I decide," he said. "She comes around." Something moved at the corner of Evelyn's mouth. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "She's going to be formidable when she's grown." "She's already formidable," he said. "It's just contained by height at the moment." They drank their coffee, and the sky came up, and Samuel emerged from the spare room, looking like a man who had also slept, but was committed to performing the opposite. And then Bridger arrived from the Millhaven Inn where he had stayed the night, and the kitchen became the organized, purposeful kind of crowded, that precedes something that cannot be undone once it begins. They reviewed the sequence one final time. Bridger would be present as a legal representative. Samuel would manage the physical evidence. Cord, who had spent the night at the Millhaven Inn at Bridger's suggestion outside Garrett's jurisdiction for one more night, would be present and would speak if called upon. Evelyn would speak. Caleb would speak if needed, and would need to manage the room if Garrett's deputies tried to physically intervene, which Bridger assessed as a real possibility. "He won't arrest me in front of the whole town," Evelyn said. "Not again. Not with a lawyer present. He might try," Bridger said. "He's a man who responds to threat with escalation. Don't assume he'll calculate the optics." "Then I'll speak fast," she said. Bridger looked at her over his spectacles, with the expression of a man who has spent 30 years in law and still occasionally encounters someone who surprises him. "Yes," he said, "that would be advisable." The Silverbrook Town Hall was a timber-framed building on the main street, large enough for its purpose, with none left over rows of benches facing a low platform at the front, a wood stove in the corner that was never quite adequate to the room's ambitions, and windows set high enough in the walls that the light came in at a slant and lit the dust in the air during afternoon meetings. Tonight it was evening light, not afternoon, and the building was full by the time Caleb's group arrived. He had timed it deliberately. Not early. He did not want them sitting and waiting and giving Garrett time to speak to people before the meeting formally started. Not so late as to seem evasive. They came in at 10 minutes before the hour, and the room was already at 50-odd people, with more filing in behind them. Caleb felt the shift when they entered. It was not dramatic. No one said anything. No one made a scene. It was the particular quality of silence that happens when a group of people collectively process a piece of unexpected information and have not yet decided what to do with it. Evelyn Hart, the woman Garrett had tied to the post, was walking into the town meeting, with a man none of them recognized, and a man in a lawyer's traveling coat. Garrett was already at the front of the room. He saw them come in. His face did not change, which told Caleb that Garrett had been warned. Somyon had talked, which was predictable and had been planned for. What the warning had not included, apparently, was the full scope of what they were carrying, because Garrett's stillness was the stillness of a man managing a known problem, not the stillness of a man confronting something larger than he prepared for. That distinction mattered. They took seats 3 rows from the front. Samuel put the leather saddlebag on the bench beside him. Bridger set his document case on his knees and folded his hands on top of it, with the patient, faintly absent air of a man who spends a great deal of time in rooms like this and has learned to conserve energy until the relevant moment. Evelyn sat between Caleb and Samuel, her back straight, her hands in her lap. She was looking at the front of the room. She was not looking at Garrett. He was looking at her. The meeting was called to order by Alderman Cooper, a heavy-set man with white whiskers who served as the town's unofficial civic chairman and who was doing his best to appear as though this was a normal evening, despite the palpable quality of the room. He read the agenda. The agenda was routine road maintenance, the school fund, a dispute about the property line at the edge of the Miller lot. Normal things. Then Garrett stood. He did not wait for the agenda item that designated time for the marshal's report. He simply stood, and Cooper did not stop him. Because Cooper had never stopped Garrett from doing anything and was not going to start tonight. "Before we get into business," Garrett said, in the practiced tone of a man who knows exactly how to use a room, "I want to address something that I'm sure many of you have noticed. Evelyn Hart, the woman in custody for the murder of Daniel Hart, is in this room tonight." He looked at her directly. "I want the town to understand that her presence here does not change the facts of her case. It does not change what this office has documented and what will be presented to the circuit judge when he arrives next month." A murmur through the room. The circuit judge. Caleb registered this. The mention was deliberate, a reminder that the official machinery was still in motion and that what happened in this room was outside its process. "She is," Garrett continued, "accompanied by men I do not recognize, one of whom appears to be a lawyer, which is her right. Every accused person has that right. What they do not have the right to do is use a town gathering to relitigate a matter that is before the law." He looked at the room now, not at Evelyn. "Working them. I'd ask that we proceed with the agenda and trust the process we've established." Cooper began to speak. Bridger was on his feet before the first word was out. "My name is James Bridger," he said, in the clear, carrying voice of a man who has addressed courtrooms for 30 years. "I'm a licensed attorney in this territory, engaged by the family of the late Daniel Hart in connection with his estate and related matters. I appreciate the marshal's concern for process, and I share it, which is why I'd like to put before this town, as a matter of public record, certain information that speaks directly to the administration of law in this community." Cooper looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Bridger. The room held its breath in the collective way rooms do when the thing everyone came to see starts happening. You can sit down, counselor, Garrett said. This isn't a courthouse. No, Bridger agreed. It's a town hall, where the citizens of this community have every right to hear information that affects the safety and integrity of their town. Would you like to tell them they don't have that right, Marshal? The question landed the way it was designed to. Garrett could not say yes. Not in front of 50 people, and saying no succeeded the floor. His jaw worked once. Say what you have to say, he said, and then we'll address it. Bridger sat. He looked at Evelyn, and Evelyn stood up. She had not been certain, until the moment itself, that she could do it. She had told herself she was certain, had rehearsed the words, had run through the sequence in her mind until it felt mechanical and manageable. But the room was not mechanical. The room was 50 people with faces she recognized and faces she didn't, and at the front of it was the man who had put a rope around her wrists and offered her to the crowd like something he was done with. And he was looking at her now with the particular contempt of a man who does not believe she will actually speak. That contempt was, she would think later, the thing that helped most. My name is Evelyn Hart, she said. Her voice came out steady. I came to Silverbrook 5 months ago to marry Daniel Hart, to whom I am not related. Daniel was a man I had corresponded with for 6 months. I had never met him in person. I arrived on the afternoon stage and walked to his house on Birch Road and found him dead. I was arrested that evening by Marshal Garrett. She paused. The room was very quiet. I spent 4 months in a cell without a formal charge being filed against me. No trial was scheduled. No formal evidence was presented. I was held because holding me was useful. She looked at the room, not at Garrett. I want you to understand that I'm not here tonight to ask for your sympathy. I'm here because the man who killed Daniel Hart is in this room, and the evidence of it is sitting in that bag. And the people of this town deserve to know what has been done in their name. Garrett moved. He was on his feet, and his hand was at his belt. Not quite at the gun, but close, the gesture of a man reminding a room that he is the one with authority here. I'm going to stop this right now, he said. His voice had shed the management. There was something underneath it that was harder and colder. This woman is making criminal accusations, she is, Bridger said, standing again. And I'm her legal representative, and those accusations are documented and witnessed, and in the event that anyone in this room attempts to remove her or interfere with her right to speak, they will be answering to the territorial court for obstruction. He held Garrett's gaze. Sit down, Marshal, or confirm for everyone present that you have something to hide. The room said a sound. Not a word, something more collective than that. A shifting, a murmur, the sound of 50 people reassessing simultaneously. Garrett sat slowly, the way a man sits when he is calculating and has not yet arrived at a number. Evelyn continued. She told it in sequence, not in the disordered way of someone trying to manage emotion, but in the deliberate forward motion of someone who has rehearsed the sequence and knows which order the pieces need to come in to land correctly. She told them about arriving, about finding Daniel, about Garrett walking in the back door. She told them about the cell. She told them about the post in the street, which some of them had witnessed personally, and at which point she saw some faces in the room change, not dramatically, but genuinely. The specific expression of a person confronting something they were complicit in and finding the confrontation uncomfortable. She told them about seeing Garrett on Birch Road. Then Samuel stood. He took the ledger from the bag and held it up. This is Daniel Hart's personal account of his investigation into land fraud in this territory, he said. An investigation that led to his death. I'll summarize what it contains, and Mr. Bridger will speak to its legal status, but I want to read you one passage directly. He opened the ledger to a page he had marked. He read the entry, Daniel's own words, the November 14th entry, the one that documented the arrangement with Garrett, the payment, the name. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. People looked at Garrett. Garrett was looking at the ledger. Then Bridger stood and opened his document case and began describing, in the careful sequential language of a lawyer who knows that clarity is more persuasive than drama, the documentation of the land fraud, the survey alterations, the deed modifications, the 7 families, the names at the land office, the financial records connecting the payments to Garrett. He was 20 minutes into this. The room was still. People leaning forward on the benches, the wood stove in the corner doing its inadequate work on the cold. When Cord stood up, he was near the back of the room, which Caleb had not known in advance. Cord had positioned himself there without discussion, which suggested its own kind of deliberate thinking. He stood and the room turned to look at him, and there was a moment of recognition, Garrett's deputy, in his coat, that shifted the quality of the room's attention again. My name is Thomas Cord, he said. I served as deputy marshal under Wade Garrett for 2 years. Past tense. The room registered it. I want to say something about November 28th, the night Daniel Hart died. Garrett was on his feet again, and this time there was no calculation in it. He moved with the momentum of a man who has run out of patience and has decided that consequence is a problem for later. Cord, he said, low warning. I know where Marshal Garrett was that afternoon, Cord said. His voice shook slightly on the first word and steadied. He told me he was going to Victor Harding's ranch. Harding's ranch is west of town. He came back 2 hours later than he said he would. I noted it at the time because I was waiting for him. And when Miss Hart told me in the cell that she had seen him on Birch Road, which is east of town, that evening, He stopped, steadied again. I didn't do anything about it. I'm telling you now because I should have told you then. The room was not quiet the way it had been quiet before. This was a different quality of silence, heavier, with something underneath it that was not quite sound, but was on its way to becoming one. Garrett said, You are finished in this county. Yes, Cord said. I expect I am, Bridger said. If the room will allow it, there is one more piece of evidence. It requires a mechanical device in approximately 11 minutes. They had brought the dictaphone and the recording. Bridger's clerk operated it. He had more experience with the device, and the room arranged itself around the improbable presence of a machine on the speaker's platform in the Silverbrook Town Hall, and Daniel Hart's voice came into the room for the first time since his death. Caleb watched the room while the recording played. He watched the moment the second voice on the recording became recognizable, the moment when enough people had heard enough of it to understand whose voice it was. It did not happen all at once. It spread through the room in waves, person to person, the understanding arriving at different speeds in different faces. Some of them looked at Garrett immediately. Some looked at the machine. Some looked at the floor. Garrett did not look at anything. He was very still, sitting in his chair with his hands on his knees, and Caleb had the distinct impression of a man doing internal arithmetic under considerable pressure and finding the numbers were not working out. When the recording ended, the room held its silence for several seconds. Then a woman near the front, Caleb, recognized her as the wife of one of the town's older merchants, a woman who had lived in Silverbrook for 30 years and who was not known for dramatic statements, said, in a clear, carrying voice, He needs to answer for this. It was not a legal verdict. It was not a formal declaration. But it landed in the room with the weight of something that had been agreed to, collectively, without anyone calling a vote. Cooper, who had been sitting at his place at the front with the expression of a man riding out a flood on a small boat, stood up. Marshal Garrett, he said, with the careful formality of a man handling something fragile, in light of what has been presented tonight, I'm asking you to. I'm not going anywhere based on a dead man's scribblings and a voice on a machine, Garrett said. He was standing again. His hand was at his belt again. This is manufactured. All of it. This woman killed Daniel Hart, and her brother came here with a lawyer to muddy the water, and you people are letting it happen. The financial records show your name, Samuel said from his seat. No drama, just the fact. Records can be altered, Garrett said. Yes, Samuel said. That's rather the point of tonight. A sound is in the room. Not quite laughter, not quite anything else. Something that acknowledged what had just happened and found it, in a grim way, accurate. Garrett looked at the room. Caleb watched him do it. Watched him assess 50 faces and find in them not the deference he was accustomed to, not the careful neutrality that people arrange when they are afraid, but something else. He watched Garrett understand that the room had shifted underneath him while he was trying to hold it still. 2 of Garrett's deputies were near the side door. Caleb had noted them when they came in. He was watching them now. One of them, the older one, a man named Phelps, who had been with Garrett for years, was also watching the room. Phelps looked at Garrett. Then he looked at the floor. Then he took a step back from the door, not forward. That step backward was, Caleb would think afterward, the moment. Garrett read it the same way Caleb did. He looked at Phelps and then looked back at the room, and something changed in his expression. The specific change of a man who has been calculating on the assumption that certain pieces were where he left them and has discovered they have moved. He made one more attempt. Whatever you think you've heard tonight, he said, addressing the room with the last of the authority he had. This woman is still accused of a man's death. Whatever else is true or not true, that fact doesn't go away because a lawyer came to town. No, Bridger said, rising one final time, it doesn't go away. It gets resolved by an actual investigation, conducted by people who are not implicated in the crime, which is precisely what I will be requesting from the territorial court as of tomorrow morning. He looked at the room. What you've heard tonight constitutes sufficient grounds for the removal of Marshal Garrett from office pending that investigation, and for the formal clearing of Evelyn Hart's name in connection with Daniel Hart's death. I'm asking this town, as citizens with authority over their own civic institutions, to act on what you know. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Cooper said, All those in favor. It was not a formal legal proceeding. It was a town full of people doing the thing that towns do, when they have been shown something clearly enough, and long enough that looking away is no longer possible. Hands went up. Not all of them. There were people along the back wall who kept their hands down, people whose reasons were their own. But most of them. More than enough. Garrett stood in the front of the room for a moment after the count, and his face in that moment was something Caleb did not have a simple word for. It was not fear. It was not defeat. It was the expression of a man confronting the particular discomfort of being seen accurately by people who had a choice about whether to act on what they saw and chose yes. Then Phelps walked to the front of the room and stood beside Cooper. "I'll take his badge," Phelps said, "until someone official gets here." Garrett looked at Phelps. The look was long and said several things that would not have been appropriate to say aloud in a room full of people. Then he unclipped the badge from his coat and held it for a moment, the specific weighted moment of someone releasing something they have held for a long time, and set it on the table in front of Cooper. He walked out without another word. The room exhaled. The aftermath was not clean. It never was. There were people who came forward after the meeting to speak to Bridger and Samuel, people who had information about the land fraud, about Harding's operations, about things they had witnessed and kept quiet because the cost of speaking had been too high. A man named Garrett, no relation, the name was common, who had sold his east of town 2 years ago under what he now understood had been pressure that had felt like a reasonable business decision at the time, but looked different in the light of what he'd just heard. A woman whose husband had filed a complaint about his neighbor's property line and been told by the marshal's office that the survey was definitive and there was nothing to be done. Caleb stood at the back of the room and watched people approach his lawyer and his ally and speak the things they had been holding, and he felt something that was not satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction implied a smoothness to the outcome that the outcome did not have, but something adjacent to it. The specific quality of a problem that has been addressed, imperfectly, by a group of imperfect people making a collective decision under pressure. Evelyn was near the front of the room, standing with her arms folded and her coat on, talking to a woman Caleb didn't recognize, older, broad-faced, with the look of a rancher's wife. The conversation appeared to be the woman talking and Evelyn listening, and at one point the woman put her hand on Evelyn's arm and said something, and Evelyn looked at the floor and then looked up and nodded, and whatever passed between them appeared to be real, though he was too far away to hear it. Samuel appeared at his elbow. "Harding's going to run," Samuel said quietly. "He'll have heard about this by morning. If he's smart, he's already planning." "He won't get far," Caleb said. "Bridger's message to the territorial court goes out tonight. They've been looking for a reason. A reason and the evidence are different things. They have both now," Caleb said. Samuel looked at the front of the room, where Bridger was writing with rapid efficiency while two men talked at him simultaneously. "What happens to Evelyn?" he asked. Caleb had been expecting the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what happens now? Her name gets cleared officially, which will take time, but it's started. She has no home, no possessions beyond what she came with, and the man she was supposed to marry is dead." Samuel said all of this without weight, just as facts, laid out. "She's not your obligation, Thornton." "I know that," Caleb said. "I'm going to offer to take her back to Kansas," Samuel said. "I have work there. She can stay with me and my wife while she decides what she wants to do." He paused. "I want you to know that's an option before." He stopped. The pause had something deliberate in it. "Before what?" Caleb said. Samuel looked at him with the gray eyes that were Evelyn's eyes and said nothing for a moment, with the particular eloquence of someone who doesn't need words for what they are communicating. "Before she decides," Samuel said carefully. Caleb looked at the front of the room. Evelyn had finished her conversation with the older woman and was standing alone now, looking toward the door that Garrett had walked out of, with an expression he had no category, for it was too complicated and too private, and he was not close enough to read it accurately. "That's her decision," Caleb said. "Not mine." "Yes," Samuel said. "That's what I'm saying." He moved away to help Bridger, and Caleb stood at the back of the room in the inadequate warmth of the wood stove and watched the town of Silverbrook conduct its messy, imperfect reckoning, and thought about what Samuel had meant and what he himself meant, and how much distance there was still between those two things, and how much he was or wasn't prepared to close it. He was still thinking about it when Evelyn walked back through the room toward him. She moved through the crowd without looking at the people who turned to watch her pass, not avoiding them, just not requiring their attention. When she reached him, she stopped and stood beside him and looked at the room. "Cooper said he'd get word to the Mercer family," she said. "The ones in Denver. Good. There'll be a formal inquiry. Bridger says 6 weeks, maybe 2 months before someone from the territorial court arrives." "That sounds right." She was quiet for a moment. "Then Samuel is going to offer to take me to Kansas." "He mentioned it," Caleb said. She turned to look at him. The measuring quality, the one he had first noticed when he untied her from the post, and she had looked at him with the careful assessment of someone who has learned not to assume help, is what it presents itself as. But it was different now. It had the quality of something that had been tested and had held. "What do you want?" she asked, directly, which was her way. He looked at her. He thought about the things he could say, the practical ones, the ranch and the girls and the housekeeper arrangement, the careful framing of something in terms of utility rather than the thing it actually was. He thought about how he had been doing that, more or less, for 5 months, and how she had been doing something similar, and how neither of them was particularly fooling the other. "I want you to stay," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. She was not going to make this easy, which was consistent with everything he knew about her, and which he found he appreciated, because easy was not the same thing as real. "Why?" she said. He considered the honest version of the answer, which was complicated, and would require more than a single sentence in the back of a room full of people. He gave her the sentence that was the beginning of it. "Because my daughters think you're already home," he said, "and I'm starting to agree with them." The room went on around them. Bridger writing, Samuel talking, Cooper organizing the human chaos of a community digesting something large. The wood stove made its small sounds. People moved past without noticing them standing together at the back of the hall, which was fine. This was not a moment that required an audience. Evelyn looked at the floor for a moment. When she looked up, the measuring quality had shifted into something else warmer and more complicated. The expression of a person who has been handed something they wanted and are confronting the reality of that, which is always more complex than the wanting. "I'll think about it," she said. "All right," he said. "Don't look so settled about it," she said. "I said I'd think." "I know what you said," he said. She almost smiled. The same almost smile he had been cataloging since the second week, the one that got almost all the way there and then stopped just short of completing itself, as though finishing it cost more than she was prepared to spend in public. "It's late," she said. "The girls will be waiting." "They will," he agreed. They walked out of the Silverbrook town hall together, into the cold and the dark and the particular clarity of a night after a thing has happened that changes the shape of what comes next, and behind them the room continued its loud, imperfect work, and ahead of them the road ran out of town toward the ranch and the girls and all the ordinary difficulty of a life that was, against considerable odds, still there to be lived. She thought about it for 3 days. Caleb did not press her. He was not built for pressing people toward decisions they had not yet made. And he understood, without needing it explained, that what she was deciding was not a small thing dressed up as a large one. It was actually large. It was the rest of her life arranged around a man she had known for 5 weeks, under conditions that were not, by any reasonable measure, a fair test of anything. He knew that. He expected she knew it too. So he ran the ranch, and she helped with the girls, and they ate at the same table, and talked about the things that needed talking about Bridger's progress with the territorial court, Samuel's plans, the state of the east fence that Price had been patching since October. And he did not bring up what he had said in the town hall, and neither did she. And the 3 days had a particular quality to them that was not comfortable exactly, but was honest, which he preferred, Samuel stated. He had planned to leave within a day or two of the town meeting, but there were legal matters that needed his presence. Bridger required a family representative for the formal documentation of Daniel's estate, such as it, and there were statements to be signed and witnesses to be formally recorded. He was useful, and he knew it, and he stayed without making a production of the fact that he was also clearly waiting to see what his sister decided. On the morning of the 3rd day, Evelyn came to the barn, where Caleb was working on the harness that had been needing attention since before any of this started. She stood in the door the same way he had stood in the barn door, watching her with the girls, which he noted without comment. She had the red blanket over her shoulders, despite the fact that the morning was not particularly cold. "I'm staying," she said. He set down the harness. "All right. I have conditions," she said. "Tell me I'm not Clara," she said. "I know that doesn't need saying, but I'm saying it anyway, because I want us to be clear from the beginning. I'm not a replacement for her, and I won't be treated like one, not by you and not by the girls. Clara was their mother, and she deserves to stay that." "Agreed," he said. "I won't be a housekeeper who becomes a wife without anyone acknowledging the difference. If I'm going to be your wife, I want to be asked properly, and I want to say yes properly, and I want it to be a real thing, not an arrangement that develops into something else sideways." He looked at her steadily. "Is that a request or a condition?" "It's a condition," she said. "Then I'll ask you properly," he said. "When the time is right." She held his gaze. "The time being when we actually know each other." "Yes," he said, "which will take longer than 5 weeks." "I'm aware of that." She considered him for a moment. "You're not going to argue with any of this." "No," he said. "They're reasonable conditions." "Most men would argue," she said. "Not accusatory. Just observational, the way she made most observations." "I'm not most men," he said. "And you're not most women. So we'll manage." Something settled in her face. Not quite relief, because she was not a person who showed relief plainly, but the particular quality of a decision that has been made and has landed on solid ground. She nodded once and looked around the barn with the practical attention of someone who has decided to occupy a space and is beginning to take its measure. The east fence needs more than patching, she said. I know, and whoever is teaching Rose her multiplication has her doing it backwards. That's me, he said. Then I'll take over the multiplication, she said, and walked back to the house, the red blanket trailing behind her in the cold morning air. He stood in the barn for a moment after she left. Then he went back to the harness and worked on it until noon, and the work felt different than it had before. In a way, he did not examine too closely, because he was, as previously established, not a man who examined feelings as a first response. He filed it under reel and kept working. Victor Harding did not run, which surprised people who had predicted he would. He stayed on his ranch for 11 days after the town meeting, and in those 11 days he made 3 attempts to manage the situation through the channels that had always worked before: a message to the land office, a conversation with the county commissioner, a letter to a contact in the territorial capital whose name appeared in Daniel's ledger. None of them worked because the machinery he had relied on was broken in ways he did not fully understand yet, and the people he was reaching out to were either already cooperating with Bridger's investigation or were calculating their own positions and finding that the calculus had changed. On the 12th day, 2 territorial marshals arrived in Silverbrook. They were not men from the county. They were from the capital, sent by the court in response to Bridger's formal complaint, which had arrived with Daniel's documentation and the recording and cord-signed statement and the weight of a lawyer who had been practicing for 30 years and knew how to make a filing land with appropriate force. Caleb was in town when they arrived. He was not there for that purpose. He had come for feed and to collect a package, but he saw them ride in and recognized the purpose of their arrival in the way their horses were stabled and the direction they walked from the stable and the careful, unhurried efficiency with which they moved. He completed his errands and went home. The territorial marshals spent 4 days in Silverbrook. They reviewed documents. They interviewed 12 people, including the deputy Phelps, including Cooper and 2 members of the town council, and including Evelyn, who gave her statement in Bridger's temporary office in the Millhaven Inn with Samuel present, Caleb waiting outside in the hall, because she had said she wanted to do it herself, and he had respected that. She came out after 40 minutes. He was sitting on a bench in the hall with his hat in his hands, which was not a position he had spent much time in before, and which he found uncomfortable in a specific way that was not about the bench. Well, he said. They believed me, she said. She said it with the careful flatness of someone who is not yet prepared to feel the full weight of something. They've already spoken to Cord and Phelps. They have the recording. She sat down beside him. They said the formal clearance will take several weeks because there's a process, but the investigation is no longer treating me as a suspect. He nodded. They were professional, she said, respectful. One of them apologized. She paused. On behalf of the territorial law enforcement system. He actually said that. She looked at her hands. I didn't know what to do with it. What did you do? I said, thank you, she said. What else do you say to that? He thought about it. Nothing, probably. Thank you is right. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the inn, a wagon went past on Millhaven's main street. Somewhere a door opened and let out a brief slice of warm air and voices before closing again. I've been angry for 5 months, she said, not constantly. There were days in the cell when I wasn't anything, I was just surviving. But underneath everything, all of it, there was this. She stopped. Started again. I thought if the truth came out, I would stop being angry. I thought that was the deal. The truth comes out and you get the anger back. She looked at the wall. I'm still angry. Yes, he said. That's how it works. She looked at him. The anger doesn't go when the thing gets resolved, he said. It goes when you've had time to put it somewhere. That takes longer than a court process. He paused. Clara died in February 2 years ago. I was angry for most of the first year. Not at her. He moved his hands, indicating something without a clean shape. At the fact of it. At the way it happened. That she went out into the cold for the girls and the cold took her. Did it go? She asked. Mostly, he said. It changes. Becomes something different, still heavy, but not the same shape. He looked at his hat. I don't think it fully goes. I think you just get better at carrying it. She was quiet for a longer moment. He was a good man, she said. Daniel. From his letters. I think he was a genuinely good man, and he found something that was wrong, and he decided he couldn't leave it alone, and that decision killed him. She said this in a voice that was not performing grief. It was the voice of someone stating a true thing that they have looked at from several angles and found consistently true. I never met him. I don't have the right to mourn him the way people who knew him do. But I think about him. That seems like the right thing to do, Caleb said. Someone should, she said. They sat in the hall of the Millhaven Inn until Samuel came out. And then the three of them went back to the ranch, and the girls were waiting in the yard because Rose had somehow determined the approximate time of their return and stationed herself accordingly. And Lily was with her because wherever Rose went, Lily eventually followed. And when Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, Rose said, with her customary absence of preamble, "Well, Evelyn said, it's going to be all right." Rose examined her for a moment with the analytical attention she gave to everything. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Evelyn said. Rose appeared to accept this. Then she said, "Lily dropped your blanket in the mud this morning. She didn't mean to. She's been upset about it." Evelyn looked at Lily, who was standing 2 feet behind Rose with the expression of a child who has been hoping this subject would not come up. "Where is it?" Evelyn asked. "I washed it," Lily said, in a very small voice. "It's drying. Some of the mud didn't come out." Evelyn went to Lily and crouched down to her level, which was something she had started doing in the second week. Not talking down to the girls, but getting to where they were, physically, the way people do when they mean for a conversation to be equal. "Lily," she said. "I'm sorry," Lily said. "The blanket has been in a blizzard," Evelyn said. "It's been wrapped around 2 freezing children. It's been in a saddlebag for 11 days. Little mud is not going to ruin it." Lily's expression performed a complex internal negotiation. "Some of the red came out too," she admitted, "in the wash." "Then it's a lighter red blanket," Evelyn said. "That's all." Lily looked at her for a moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around Evelyn's neck with the complete, unqualified commitment of a 6-year-old who has decided a person is safe. And Evelyn held on. And Caleb stood by the wagon and looked at the sky, which was doing something interesting with the light in the west, and let the moment be what it was. Harding was arrested on a Tuesday 3 weeks after the town meeting. The territorial marshals rode out to his ranch with a formal warrant and 2 additional deputies, which turned out to be unnecessary. Harding came out of his house when they arrived and stood on his porch and looked at the warrant with the expression of a man who has been watching a wall approach for some time and has run out of ideas about how to stop it. He was 54 years old and had built something substantial and had decided at some point that the building was more important than the methods, which was a decision that had worked until it didn't. He went with them without resistance. Caleb heard this from Cooper, who heard it from one of the deputies. He did not feel the satisfaction he might have expected to feel. He felt something quieter and more complicated, the specific feeling of a problem that has been resolved in the necessary way, with all the mess and cost that resolution entailed, none of which could be undone. Fellows, the land office clerk, had already made a deal with the territorial court in exchange for his cooperation. The county commissioner had resigned. 2 of Harding's ranch managers were named in the formal indictment. The governor's office issued a statement acknowledging that a complaint filed by Daniel Hart had been improperly handled and committing to a review of land office procedures, which was the kind of statement that governments issue when they want to appear to be doing more than they are, but which in this case Bridger assessed would result in at least some actual reform, because the territorial court was genuinely interested in the problem now that it had been made visible. 7 families had lost land. 3 of them were traceable and were contacted by Bridger's office regarding potential remediation claims. The process, Bridger warned, would be slow and the outcomes uncertain, but it had begun. The Mercers contacted in Denver wrote back within 2 weeks. Their letter, which Samuel read aloud in Caleb's kitchen, because Bridger had sent it to Samuel as the family representative, was 4 pages long and contained several passages that required the reader to put the letter down for a moment before continuing. They had not known, they wrote, that anyone had been fighting for them. They had assumed that losing the land was simply the way of things, that people like them lost to people like Harding because that was the structure of the world, and it did not change. Finding out that Daniel Hart had died trying to expose what was done to them. Finding out that a woman they had never met had survived 4 months in a cell because she was the person Harding and Garrett needed to blame had undone. Something in them that they had apparently sealed shut. Evelyn listened to the letter and looked at the table, and did not say anything for a long time after Samuel finished reading. "He mattered," she said finally, "Daniel. What he did mattered." "Yes," Samuel said, "I want that to be." She stopped. "Try it again. I want people to know that. Not just the fraud, not just Harding and Garrett. I want people to know that there was a man who found something wrong and couldn't leave it alone, and it cost him everything. That should be said clearly." "Bridger is writing a formal account for the territorial record," Samuel said. "Daniel's name will be in it." "That's not enough," she said. "No," Samuel agreed, "it's not. But it's what there is." She accepted this with the particular expression of someone who has learned, at some cost, that the difference between what should be and what is cannot always be closed and must sometimes simply be lived with. Samuel left 4 days later. He had been gone longer than he planned, and his wife was waiting, and his work in Kansas was accumulating in his absence. He and Evelyn said goodbye in the yard on a cold morning with the sky doing its flat gray preparation for weather. And it was not a dramatic goodbye. They were not dramatic people, either of them. But it was a long one, the kind that has years in it. And Caleb found something to do on the far side of the wagon while it happened. When Samuel rode out through the gate, he raised one hand without turning around, and Evelyn watched him go until the road bent and took him from sight. And then she stood in the yard for a moment by herself. Caleb did not go to her. He waited. She came to him. "He'll be back," she said. He said, "Spring." "Good," Caleb said. "The girls will want to meet him properly, under better circumstances." He said the same thing about them. She looked at the gate where Samuel had gone. "He likes you," she added, in the tone of someone reporting a fact that has some significance. "He said that?" "He said you were not what he expected and that was a good thing." She looked at Caleb with something that was close to amusement. Coming from Samuel, that's practically a speech. The formal clearance came 6 weeks after the town meeting, in a document bearing the territorial court seal, addressed to Evelyn Hart and stating in the careful, bloodless language of legal instruments that the investigation into the death of Daniel Hart had concluded that she bore no responsibility for said death, and that all prior actions taken against her person were accordingly without legal basis. It was as such documents went thorough. It named Garrett. It named Harding. It described the evidence. It was in the way that official language can occasionally achieve despite its nature, close to an apology without using the word. Bridger brought it in person. He read it to her at the kitchen table with the girls present, because she had not asked them to leave, and because some things she had decided should be heard by the people who were going to be her family. When Bridger finished reading, Rose said, "What does accordingly without legal basis mean?" "It means they were wrong and they know it," Evelyn said. Rose considered this. "Do they say sorry?" "Not in those words." "That's not good enough," Rose said. "No," Evelyn agreed. "It's not, but it's what we have." Rose looked at the document with the expression she reserved for things she found inadequate but was willing provisionally to accept as a starting point. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to her schoolwork, which was, Caleb thought, a more mature response to institutional imperfection than most adults managed. Garrett's trial was held in the territorial capital in March, which was too far for most Silverbrook residents to attend, but which Bridger attended and about which he sent detailed letters. The charges were numerous: corruption, obstruction, abuse of office, and as an accessory to the death of Daniel Hart, for which the primary charge went to a man named Doyle, who had worked for Harding, and whose involvement Daniel's ledger had documented, and who had, under questioning, confirmed Garrett's knowledge and cooperation. Garrett received 7 years. Doyle received 15. Harding received 12, plus civil judgments that would take years to work through the courts. But that had begun, which was the important thing. Cord was not charged. His cooperation had been complete and early, and his lawyer, a young man from Millhaven who turned out to be sharper than his youth, suggested, had negotiated his status as a witness rather than a defendant. He left Silverbrook after the trial, and Caleb heard months later that he had found work as a deputy in a town 2 counties north under a different marshal. He hoped the young man had learned the right lesson from what he had been part of and had the sense to apply it. He was not certain. Some people learned and some people found ways to explain what they had done that allowed them to do it again. That was simply true of people and could not be engineered away. Phelps was not charged either. He had stepped back from the door at the town meeting, and that step had been noted and had mattered, and beyond that he had nothing to answer for that the court could pin. He was appointed interim marshal while Silverbrook waited for the territorial authority to assign someone permanent. He was not a brilliant man or a complicated one, but he was not corrupt, which in context felt like a significant virtue. Caleb asked her in April. Not because April was a romantic month. It wasn't, particularly, being cold and muddy and requiring the kind of sustained effort that left very little space for sentiment. Because April was when the east field needed turning, and he had been out since before sunrise, and she had brought lunch out to him in the field the way she had started doing in the 3rd week, and had stayed to eat with him the way she had started doing in the 4th, and they were sitting on the upturned fence rail with their food, and the muddy field in front of them, and the sky doing its spring's business overhead. And it was, in every practical sense, an ordinary Tuesday. He had thought about how to do this. He had thought about it more than he usually thought about things, which was saying something, because he thought about most things considerably. He had composed sentences in his head and discarded them. He had considered timing evenings, which had a natural warmth to them, or mornings, which were her better time, or the particular quality of weekend afternoons when the girls were occupied, and the ranch had a temporary stillness. In the end, he did it on a Tuesday in a muddy field because the moment presented itself, and he had learned, over the course of a life that had not gone entirely as planned, that the moments that presented themselves were generally more reliable than the ones that were arranged. "I told you I'd ask you properly when the time was right," he said. She had a piece of bread halfway to her mouth. She stopped. "I think the time is right," he said. "I know each other now." "Not completely. I don't think you fully know another person in a year, maybe not in 10 years. But enough. I know that you're direct and you're stubborn, and you're better with the girls than anyone I could have arranged to find. I know that you keep the red blanket on the chair by your bed, and I know that you check the east fence in the evenings because you don't trust my assessment of it. I know that you were angry for 5 months, and you're still angry some days, and you manage it without making it anyone else's problem." He looked at her. "I know I'd like to know the rest of it, whatever comes after this. I'd like to know it with you." She put the bread down. She was looking at him with the measuring quality, the one that had never entirely gone, which he had stopped expecting to disappear, and had started simply accepting as part of who she was, the same way he accepted that she was right about the east fence. "That's not a question yet," she said. "I'm getting there," he said. "Take your time," she said. But her voice had something in it that was not quite the dry quality she deployed for deflection. Something softer and less defended. "Evelyn Hart," he said. "Will you marry me?" The muddy field was quiet. Somewhere in the distance, one of the horses made a sound and then stopped. The sky was doing the specific pale blue of early Colorado spring, the kind that looked tentative but was actually committed. "Yes," she said. "Not I'll think about it. Not careful. Just yes, direct and real," the way she said everything that mattered. He nodded. She picked up the bread again. "The east fence still needs work," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not letting it go just because you asked me nicely." "I didn't think you would," he said. They ate their lunch in the muddy field, and then he went back to work, and she walked back to the house, and at the door she turned and looked at him across the field, and he looked back at her, and that was all. No gesture, no performance, just two people looking at each other across a distance they had both chosen to close. They married in June, in the yard of the Thornton ranch, because Evelyn had no interest in the church, and Caleb had no strong feelings about location, and the yard had the practical advantage of being large enough for the people who came. More people came than either of them expected. Cooper came. The Alderman family came. Bridger made the trip from the capital, which he said was professionally motivated but which everyone understood was not. Several families from the surrounding territory came, including people Caleb knew only slightly, and people Evelyn had met in the weeks after the town meeting, the slow process of a community working out its relationship to a woman it had once watched tied to a post. Cord sent a letter. It arrived 2 days before the wedding, addressed to Evelyn, and she read it in the kitchen with her coffee and then folded it and put it in the pocket of her coat, the same pocket that had once held Daniel's letters, and did not discuss its contents, but appeared, for the rest of that day, to be carrying something that had settled, rather than something that was still moving. Samuel came back, as he had promised. He arrived 3 days before the wedding with his wife, a practical and warm-hearted woman named Frances, who took one look at the ranch and the girls and Evelyn and Caleb together and said to Samuel, at a volume she probably intended to be private but which carried in the kitchen, "She's going to be fine." Samuel said, "I know," Frances said, "better than fine." Samuel said, "I know that too." The ceremony itself was brief and plain, and conducted by a justice of the peace from Millhaven, who had no objection to doing things in yards, and who spoke without pretension about commitment and the meaning of a chosen life, and then moved briskly to the legal portion, which was the part that mattered in the technical sense. Rose stood beside Evelyn and held the small bouquet of early summer wildflowers that she had assembled herself with an intensity of purpose that suggested she had been planning it for some time. Lily stood beside Caleb and held his hand and looked at the proceedings with the wide, serious attention of a child who understands that something important is happening and has decided to receive it fully. When it was done, when the words were said and the paper was signed and it was real, Rose looked up at Evelyn with the analytical gaze that never entirely softened and said, "Can we call you Mama now?" The yard went quiet in the way yards go quiet when everyone in them has simultaneously decided to listen to one thing. Evelyn looked at Rose, then at Lily, who was watching her with the same question in her face, less articulated but equally present. "If you want to," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady. It cost her something to keep it that way, and anyone paying attention could see that. And several people were. "We want to," Lily said, with the simple finality of a 6-year-old who has made up her mind. "Then yes," Evelyn said, "you can." Lily leaned against her side, which was not dramatic. Lily was physically affectionate in the uncomplicated way of children who feel safe. And Evelyn put her arm around the child's shoulders and looked across at Caleb, and whatever passed between them in that look was private and sufficient, and did not require witnesses, though it had several. Samuel watched from the edge of the gathering, and Frances watched beside him, and later that night, when the guests had gone and the girls were in bed and Caleb was seeing to the horses and Evelyn and Frances were in the kitchen, Frances said quietly, "You're happy." Evelyn looked at her. Frances was the kind of woman who asked real questions under the guise of statements and expected real answers. "I think so," Evelyn said. I'm learning what it feels like. It's been a long time since things were right, and I want to be sure I'm reading it correctly." "What does it feel like so far?" Frances asked. Evelyn thought about it honestly, which was the only way she thought about anything. "Like something I'm not waiting to be taken away," she said. Frances nodded, the nod of a woman who understood exactly what that meant and how much it cost to have learned it the way Evelyn had. There is something that gets missed in stories like this one, in the version where everything comes right in the end. The version focuses on the resolution, the arrest, the clearance, the wedding, the children who finally have the word they wanted. And those things are real, and they matter, and they should be told. But what is harder to tell, and what is more honest, is what Evelyn carried forward. She carried the 4 months. She carried them not visibly. She was not a person who wore her damage publicly, but in specific ways that were real. She did not like closed spaces. She did not sleep easily in the first months when the wind was loud, because the wind in a cell sounds different from the wind anywhere else, and the body remembers sounds. She had days when the anger came back clearly, not at Garrett specifically, who was in a territorial prison and was no longer a current problem, but at the structure of things, the fact that what had happened to her could happen, that a woman alone and without connections could be made into whatever story was useful, that the post in the street existed and had been used without consequence until she refused to let it have one. She did not pretend these days away. She had learned in the cell that pretending things away required energy she could not always afford, and the habit of honesty about her own interior was one she had no intention of breaking. Caleb learned her tells. The days she was quieter than usual, the mornings she was up before the sky, the occasional evenings when she sat with the red blanket and looked at something that wasn't in the room. He did not try to fix these things, because he was not built for fixing what was not broken. She was not broken, she was a person who had experienced something and was living in the aftermath of it, which was different. He was present and he was steady, and he understood from his own 2 years of carrying Clara's absence that presence and steadiness were often the most honest help available. The girls helped in ways they did not know they were helping. Rose's relentless practicalities, her insistence on dealing with what was actual rather than what was preferred, had a grounding effect on everyone around her. Lily's physical affection and complete absence of self-consciousness about it meant that there was always, in the Thornton house, someone willing to simply occupy the same space as another person without requiring anything of them. The ranch helped too. The work of it, the ongoing practical demand of something alive that needed attending. The way it organized time into the useful structure of what must be done now and what can wait. Evelyn had not known anything about ranching before she arrived, and she still did not know most of it, but she learned in pieces, and without pretending to be further along than she was, and the learning was its own kind of anchor. What she had come west looking for, she had not found in the form she expected. The husband she had been promised was dead before she arrived. The new beginning she had imagined, careful, practical, built on honest terms, had been taken from her before it could start, and replaced with something she had not imagined because she could not have. What she had instead was harder and more complicated and more real than anything she had planned. A man who told her the truth when it was uncomfortable, and who did not mistake her managing for not needing. 2 girls who had claimed her with the absolute authority of children who have decided something is theirs. A piece of land that was not hers by origin, but had become hers by choice and by work, and by the slow accumulation of days that look ordinary from the outside, but are in their interior texture the actual substance of a life. She thought about Daniel Hart with some regularity, and she thought she probably always would. Not with grief exactly, because grief requires a loss you have personally sustained, and what she had lost was more abstract than personal, the life she might have had, the man she might have known, but with something. A specific awareness of the cost that came before what she had. A refusal to let the cost be invisible, to let the resolution of the story smooth over the fact of what it took to get there. One afternoon in the fall, the girls were at school. Caleb was in the north field. The ranch was doing its quiet afternoon business. She found herself at the kitchen table with paper and a pen, and she wrote a letter. Not to anyone living. Just a letter that said you found something wrong and you could not leave it alone. That mattered. You mattered. Someone knows. She did not mail it. She folded it and put it in the tin that had held the recording cylinder which she had kept, and she put the tin in the chest in the room that had been the foreman's room and was now the room where she and Caleb kept the things that mattered and didn't have a place elsewhere. Then she went out to check the east fence, which still needed watching no matter what else was happening in the world. And the afternoon was cold and clear, and the land ran out to the ridge in the particular gold of early Colorado autumn, and she stood at the fence line for a while with her hands on the top rail, not thinking anything specific, just being in the place she had chosen, which was its own kind of statement. There is a thing that people learn, if they are lucky and the circumstances permit it, which is that surviving something is not the end of the story. It is, at best, the beginning of a different one you did not plan and cannot fully control, and will have to build day by day from whatever materials are available, without guarantees and without a map. Evelyn Hart had come west looking for a husband and a second chance. She had found something harder to name and harder to lose, a life that was genuinely hers, built from wreckage and stubbornness, and the specific grace of two small girls who had seen her in the snow and known, with the absolute conviction of the very young, that she was someone worth finding again. She pulled her coat closer against the afternoon chill, and checked the fence post that had been leaning since September, and made a note to tell Caleb it needed resetting before the ground froze. Then she walked back to the house where her family was waiting, through the gold autumn field, in the life she had not planned and could not imagine giving back.